So welcome back. I hope everybody has been making great connections and taking advantage of some of the resources that we have. And now I'm ready to introduce our next keynote, who is a tremendous resource to all of us and a true visionary. Dr. April Naturale is Vice President of Disaster Services at Vibrant Emotional Health. And I always feel comforted just being in April's presence. I wish she were here in person, but she's joining us virtually. But she has that effect on others too. She's a longtime friend and colleague to all of us at Tuesday's Children. She's a traumatic stress specialist with over 3 decades of experience responding to wide-scale traumatic events. She has a unique set of skills in understanding the macro level, the big picture of community needs after tragedies, and the micro level in offering her compassion directly to individuals impacted by traumatic events. April operates on the meta level. I really think she is just incredible, and her career reflects that. I first met April through Project Liberty, which was a program after September 11th. She was the architect of the broad and multifaceted mental health response to 9/11 in the New York area, and she played a similar role in the Boston Marathon bombing behavioral health response. She has helped countless survivors and providers in dozens of communities impacted by mass violence in the US, and she's trained international psychologists, humanitarian aid workers, and crisis response teams. April remains a mentor to so many of us in this area of work, and she's blazed so many trails in leading federal emergency management and disaster response efforts. She continues in this dedication with the recently established 988 Suicide Prevention Lifeline and with Vibrant's Crisis Emotional Care Team and more. So April, thank you for your leadership and for always fighting the good fight and for being here today.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction, Sally. I hope I live up to that. Tuesday's Children's been one of the most important disaster response and mass violence organizations that have helped those in our own country and others as well. And it's always a privilege to be here and to be working with all of you, the responders in the field. So thank you for that. I want to say a word about resilience since we are in a lessons learned and resilience conference, which I'm going to try and focus on today. We've thrown the word around a lot, and I think we have the sense that it's somewhere out there, but I just want to remind us that resilience isn't something that's out there. It's something that's in us. It's innate, actually. We have this innate ability through about 10 different characteristics that allow us to be resilient. But one of the things that I think leads our resiliency is the lessons. And hearing from everybody today, I always learn something from the panels that Tuesday's Children puts together. You brought in speakers who have a lived experience, who bring knowledge and talk about their experiences in ways that's very effective for all of us. In every event I ever go to, I hear victims, family members, and community members all the time say that there are things they want others to know. They want to pay forward this information and these lessons. And so I decided to focus a bit on that today, but so appreciate all of you. Mrs. I know there's been so much work done at the European Victims Center for Victims of Terrorism and had the privilege of working on some of the curriculum there. Maggie, I don't know if you remember, but we did meet. I responded to the Tree of Life incident in Pittsburgh. There's just been so much going on that many of us, unfortunately, meet over and over again. But I did want to focus today on, as I said, the lessons learned, because I get frustrated because I've been doing this for about 30 years, and there are so many lessons we haven't learned. Preparedness is still a giant issue. We don't do enough of that. So it was really an opportunity for me to talk about and think about what have we learned over these past 3 decades when so much has happened and there are increasing incidents. And the first thing that has jumped out is that victims' voices must be heard. And the panel said that this morning. We have got to make sure that we're attending to the victims and hearing what their needs are, because we don't know what they are otherwise. And I put this one here because I do think we've done a better job in that, but it's also here because we have to make sure not to lose the progress that we've made in ensuring that victims' voices are heard. You know, the Office of Victims of Crime didn't even attend to victims' voices until very recently as well. Everything was about the rights of the perpetrator. And so there's a big shift across the country in many different organizations. Obviously, organizations like Tuesday's Children have always been about having victims' voices heard, and that's why they're so important. And we must continue to make sure that we hear what the needs of the victims are, because we can't anticipate them in ways that are effective. I loved hearing everyone this morning, a number of people talk about that children being of unique concern. I think we've done a better job in attending to the needs of children, and we need to continue there as well. And of course, finally, we have been much more attentive to the needs of responders. We have seen them, as you heard this morning, the panel talk about people who experience secondary traumatic stress or even PTSD or depression or anxiety because of their direct exposure in responding to these incidents. But we can't see responders as people who aren't affected anymore. And the lesson that we've heard over and over from Tuesday's Children, especially, the one organization that has been very focused on the fact that the long-term care needs are much, much deeper, and they go on for a longer period of time than we ever imagined. We didn't even talk about long-term care needs. I remember after 9/11 talking about what the next 5 years was going to look like, and people would look at me like, next 5 years, we're not going to be dealing with this in 5 years. Well, here we are many, many years later, from many different events, looking at the impacts that we're seeing the communities still experiencing, as well as the victims. So what we hear all the time from our colleagues at the National Child Traumatic Stress Network is that attending to children is a major importance, and we're already seeing this effect of not having done so in previous years. Again, I think we're getting better with that. We need to keep it in our line of sight. What we know from the research is that as adults, we continuously underestimate what happens to children. We let them watch TV images over and over. We talk about things in front of them, and we don't give them an opportunity to talk. I love that comment. It's hard being a kid. It is for them to take in this information that we allow them to be exposed to can actually be really damaging. So again, we must keep this in our line of sight of how do we protect children from this information, from this trauma, and what do we do once they've had the exposure, both directly and indirectly. Don't underestimate the impact of television and social media. We've already heard these reports. Oh, I hear the dogs. I didn't get to pet them. Hello. We've heard the reports, even the Surgeon General's report about social media. We have to learn to control the exposure. Remember, exposure is what can really increase the risk of anyone experiencing a serious mental illness or becoming actually diagnosed with a mental illness because of a traumatic impact. So we have to learn over and over again, saying no, turning off the television, limiting social media, and when children are exposed, because we know they learn a lot from their friends and from at school, is to give them an opportunity to talk about what they've heard and to find out what they think about it, find out what they know. Our depression and suicide rates in youth, and I'm talking like tweens, not even teens and young adults anymore. Our depression and suicide rates in tweens, in youth, are frighteningly high, and we have got to pay attention to this. Again, I think we're getting better at it. I know many of you in the room are, and we want to make sure that we recognize that it's been our attention that has been helping more recently, and we need to keep that attention up. And we've finally gotten to discover and remember that responders are human beings, right? I don't know why we didn't think so. I guess we thought that they all had, capes and protective gear that just help them to repel the negative mental health impacts, but we know that's not the case. We saw everything from suicide to substance abuse, divorce, relationship problems, and poor quality of life in responders as far back as Oklahoma City when we started to study. And I know the Red Cross has done so much in this area. They originally did a study of Oklahoma City bombers when they were providing mental health supports more than 10 years after that bombing. Certainly, we know we need to attend to those who are responding to 9/11. And then in these incidents like the Boston Marathon bombing and other mass violence incidents, responders are highly, highly impacted by incredible threat, gore, cries, pain, and suffering of people who are victims of mass violence, as well as their families. We have to stop pretending that they're not going to have the same traumatic responses. And in that way, we need to also be able to train and prepare them and support them in these events. So again, I think these are some of the most important things that we have learned in addition to looking at the long term as we're doing today. So what does recovery look like? It is, as you heard from many of our panelists today, it's talking about your experience with loved ones, with friends, not hiding it. Being with those who understand and accept how you feel. We're still a society of avoidance and denial. So we need to make sure that victims, survivors, responders, those who need support, as you heard this morning from the keynote speaker, he was great saying that just talking about this was good for him. Making sure that you're with people who understand that and accept that instead of negating the fact that you still need to talk about this. We know that routine helps. We're creatures of habit. We want to get into our routines. We want to work with coping that has worked before. And, you know, I'm a mental health professional, can do that whole alphabet of CBT, EFT, EMDR. We know that social support and good coping helps more than anything else. So we're not talking about sophisticated mental health services, although for many of us, that's a good option as well. Or at least to be able to know what good coping, what works for you. It may be something that works for you may not work for somebody else. You should know what good coping works for you and help those that you're working with to understand that as well. We know distraction is good, going back to work, trying to get back to your routine, and other positive activities like being with others, engaging in ritual. The Stars of Hope activity is a phenomenal activity that helps people to come together, to start talking to each other, to be expressive, and to bring out their art, as well as the narrative and the messages. So I hope you get a chance to do that. We know that there's very good impacts from activities in group settings like the Stars of Hope and being with the therapy dogs. Also, we often, as victims or as communities, need to get to do something outside of our own needs, because we find that, as we said before, paying it forward, talking to other survivors and victims that have an event happen after your experience, we know that paying that forward can be very effective and helpful for other people. And attend to mental health and grief support groups. They can be really helpful. They don't have to be formal. They can be informal. And giving yourself permission to have joy again. We only get joy and happiness in moments. But very often, because of survivor guilt or depression or other pain or distress in our lives, we feel like we don't deserve joy. Or that we're not allowed because this death has happened, or this illness, or this community event or violence has happened, and we feel like we can't laugh and smile. We must be able to allow joy in our lives. And we certainly have to give the children in our lives the message that they can go and have joy and happiness and do what they're supposed to do, which is to play and to learn in school. So we can model that. And that's really what recovery looks like on both an individual and a group level. I just, for fun, did a Wordle and was really interesting to see the groups being with someone and someone else and talking. It's just a fun activity to see with all the different ways that we know from the literature what helps. That you see there are so many activities. Most of them is being with others and doing things with people that can bring us to recovery. I hope you give yourself a chance to do that. We have limited our community gatherings, certainly because of COVID. And I think one of the messages today is that we need to be able to get back to those things, however we do it. If we need to be masking to be safe, even to go back to the 6-inch, or the 6-foot distance if we need to. But it doesn't mean that we shouldn't be coming together in ways that are safe for us, because we know that these things are majorly important. We have seen some communities who are not able to come together and engage in rituals, whether it's poetry, prayer, meditation, art, music, memorializing. We know that their recovery takes longer, and it's just much slower. And for some communities, it even stalls when they're not able to come together. So we know that these community activities are really important. A candlelight vigil, a storytelling event, any kind of remembrance, memorializing, talking, and being together, music, art, poetry. These things are very important. And I know we've gotten away from them, but we know from the literature and from those other survivors and communities that many of them have said that this was the one thing that helped them towards recovery more than anything else did. And so for all of us working in the area, we don't always want to create these events for the community, because we want the community to come up with these things themselves, as we said, right? Listen to the voices. What is it that they want to do, and how can we guide them in ways that help with recovery? We use the term gatekeepers in suicide prevention, and most recently, Vibrant has changed the name of the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline to the 988 Suicide and Crisis Lifeline, because we realize that most of the calls that we get, the millions of calls that we get, are people in crisis and not necessarily suicide, although they might move from crisis to suicidality. So we've started to look at what can we do to help people in crisis in addition to people in suicide crisis? And actually, all the literature points to the fact that many of the things that we do to attend to people who are suicidal are things that we can do to help people in crisis. And so we talk about gatekeepers. Gatekeepers are literally all of us, any individual, anybody who has contact with somebody else. You can be trained to do suicide assessment or crisis intervention or psychological first aid. You don't need to be a mental health professional to do these things. About half of the staff who answer the suicide line are not licensed mental health professionals, but they are the most intensely and extensively trained in suicide prevention and crisis intervention than many people across the country. And so we all should be considering ourselves gatekeepers. That means that we need to know how to attend to people who have a crisis or are in suicidal distress. I don't like to always talk about what's not helpful, but in this case, it's really important to know what things are not helpful so that we can avoid those and move to what is helpful. Right? We don't want to ignore people. Some people say something about being suicidal or not wanting to be here or being really upset, and we don't know what to say, so we don't say anything. We don't want to ignore these. We have to figure out for ourselves, how do we address that? Oh, do you want to tell me more about that? Do you want to talk about that? I'm here for you. Whatever words you find are comfortable. We tend to ignore and avoid talking about these references. And as gatekeepers, action is going to be very, very important. We don't want to act shocked, because then they're going to think, oh, they're not going to let me talk about this, right? We certainly don't want to be sworn to secrecy if somebody actually is suicidal and planning to do something, or you're afraid that they're moving from crisis to suicidality. We don't want to say, okay, we're going to keep this a secret. You're going to tell me this and I'm going to walk away. And nobody's going to be able to help you or do anything. So, in a gentle way, you want to say that, well, I think it would be really important for like your husband or your partner or, whoever else is at home or somebody close to them needs to know to help. So this way, you're telling them that you care about them. We certainly don't want to challenge or dare people. That's never helpful. And we certainly don't want to move them to taking action by daring them or challenging them. Not arguing, debating whether this is right or wrong. Religious or moral issues don't help people in crisis. Otherwise, they'd be able to take themselves out of it. But debating or arguing or bringing up a moral reason or religious reasons don't stop their pain. It doesn't usually stop their pain, and therefore it's not helpful. And the biggest issue is to not leave them alone if they continue to need assistance. Who can you connect them with? Who can you take them to or bring them to a place where they can get attention, help, or just somebody being with them? So I hope that you're not offended, but it's really important to know what's not helpful. What is helpful is this very simple screening that we call the ACT. It's acknowledging that somebody just told you that they were in emotional distress, or they told you that they were thinking about suicide. Take them seriously, pay attention, and initiate talking about it. It used to be the myth that we thought we couldn't talk to people about suicide or about emotional or mental health issues. We really need to get past that, because the emotional issues, the amount of mental health concerns and suicide in the country is way out of control. So not talking about it, we know, is not helpful. And for somebody who really seems to be unstable or actively suicide planning to do something, you want to get them immediate help. Always use the 988 number, because you'll get a trained counselor who can talk with them. You can stay with them while they call. You can call for them and give them the phone and stay with them. There are lots of ways to get help, but obviously, if it's something imminent, you want to call 911. Most of our calls are not to 911, though. Again, because when people are able to get the kind of intervention from the 988 suicide prevention line, we can talk them out of that immediate suicidal or high crisis mode. So do reach out for help, but making sure that we're attending to people and not ignoring them. For those of you who are concerned about those that you work with, other victims, especially in the early days after a disaster or a mass violence incident, we want to look for use of suicide and alcohol. Isolation is really dangerous. When I get people who tell me they don't want to be with anybody, I say, great, there's a group of people over there who don't want to be with anybody either. Go and sit with them for a while, and then we'll, get a chance. You don't have to talk, you don't have to engage with them, but we don't want you to be alone. When you're in those immediate days, that's really, really important. When somebody has experienced a disaster or a mass violence or other type of incident, and they've had a recent breakup from a close relationship, a divorce, a death, those are people we're more concerned about. Those who are, again, hopeless. You can't think of any way to help themselves or anything that's going to do. So these are all issues of concern that should bring us as gatekeepers to say, you seem to be struggling. How can I help you? What do you need? And that's as simple as it is. It's paying attention and talking to someone. I've listed out like most of the most serious distress signs. Those in red should be the red flags that pop out to you, so that if you're talking to somebody, these things can jump out at you and say, oh, this is somebody that we probably need to connect with the suicide line, a counselor, or 911 if it's an imminent issue, especially when we talk about the fact that so many people are in suicide and crisis these days. Again, our calls are through the roof. We're seeing an increased number of natural disasters, human-caused disasters, mass violence incidents, and of course, the issues that we have with so many veterans having been exposed to the pain of war, and the continuous exposure that we have with veterans who continue to work or come back and are still suffering, issues that we're seeing on TV, and those in our own communities that we're struggling with. So I wanted to make sure that you had some information. Really simple things that you can do is make sure that people don't have easy access, whether it's to some kind of lethal means. We know guns are involved in most suicide, actually, as well as drugs and alcohol. So you want to look at these things to help people who may be at high risk. And again, strong connections are really, really the most effective thing that anybody can have. Community support, feeling not isolated, that there's somebody they can reach out to. Sometimes cultural and religious beliefs help people from going to thinking about actually going through with suicide. And again, please don't ever hesitate to tell anybody to call 988. There are over 200 and something crisis centers across the country that are there to respond to people. The call wait time is under 30 seconds at this point, and everybody can get the help that they need and get directed if they need something more than immediate care. We also need to be teaching skills in problem solving, conflict resolution, and different ways to handle disputes. And I know many of you are working on that along with your disaster response programs and activities that can really help people to learn to come together, be together, and, you know, find out different ways of resolving their conflicts rather than with hate. So we know that we need to continue to work on those things with our populations. I know I'm running out of time and I had a little too many slides, but I wanted to make sure that you do have resources. I hope you have access to this information afterwards as well, but we have both the disaster distress helpline, which are specific crisis centers that will talk to people post-disaster and have done a lot of work in working with victims and community members of disaster. But people can also get the same kind of assistance by calling 988 directly. Previously, we found that people didn't want to call the suicide line if they were experiencing disaster distress, and that's why we developed the other helpline. But they're essentially the same crisis center staff who are answering the phones. Some of them may have more experience with disaster communities and disaster victims and family members than others, but they are all trained in this kind of response. And for those who are looking for treatment, the SAMHSA treatment locator number will get you to connect to somebody in your area. So there's lots of resources out there. We ask you to use them. We have the chat for 988 Lifeline as well as the telephone number 988 and the disaster distress helpline. You can also still even text, with which I know a lot of people like to do. So we strongly, strongly urge you to let people know that they're not alone. These are immediate services that can help. If you're with somebody and you want to call with them, that's fine too. However you want to do it, we want to make sure that people don't feel alone, know that help is out there, and that we have to continue to take care of each other. We belong to each other. We've got to get through these events together and make sure that we don't abandon each other. It's going to be the only way that we survive as we go through these continuing events. And so appreciate all of you doing this work. And of course, Tuesday's Children, who's a leader in the area, and for the opportunity to talk to you today. I'm sorry I couldn't be with you, but hopefully the next time. I don't know if you're going to take questions or that. I'll stop sharing. In case you want to do questions, Sally, or who's that, Catherine?
Kathy and Sally. Thank you, April.
Hello.
I think we're going to move along just because we ended up a little behind schedule.
Yeah.
But thank you,
Okay,
April.
then. Thank you.
It was incredible.
Good to see you. Appreciate everybody. Be well.
April, if you're listening, your warmth and compassion was felt all throughout this room. It felt like you were here with us. And we always learn so much from you every time we hear you speak. And we are so grateful for all that you do. I'm Kathy Murphy. I'm a Senior Program Director at Tuesday's Children. I'm here with my colleague Sally, who I think you all know, to tell you about an exciting peer initiative that has been very much survivor-driven and survivor-led. About 2 years ago, Tuesday's Children formed STOP, the Survivors of Tragedy Outreach Program, a coalition of organizations, survivors, professionals committed to helping other communities recover from tragedies. STOP is a coalition of currently 16 partner organizations and individuals representing over 20 communities in the United States.
Thanks, Kathy. So we're going to show you a brief video about STOP, and then we want to extend an invitation for others to join our efforts. So you can scan the QR code if you want to find out more. You can also contact Kathy and me directly. We want to partner with other response organizations, survivor-led organizations, compassionate professionals, and others who want to collaborate to make things better for communities recovering from mass violence, targeted violence, terrorism, and military conflict.
Christina Morset. She's one of the 12 that lost their lives at the Borderline Bar and Grill in Thousand Oaks.
Following the murder of my 6-year-old son, Jesse McCord Lewis, in his first grade classroom at Sandy Hook Elementary School.
My cousin Ashley was in the Aurora theater shooting in July of 2012. She was permanently injured and lost her unborn child as well as her 6-year-old daughter, Veronica.
On April 15th, 2013, I was running the Boston Marathon, and as I was approaching the finish line, the first explosion was just ahead.
My father, Joseph J. Pice Jr., was killed in the September 11th attacks at the Pentagon.
Beginning on September 11th, 2001, and for the past 21 years, Tuesday's Children has been supporting families going through trauma on their road to recovery. Our mission serves not only the 9/11 families and the first responder families, but also our military families, our families of the fallen, our international families who have been impacted by terrorism, and our communities who have felt the devastating effects of mass violence.
The public knows that mass shootings and tragedies of this kind are devastating, but what they don't realize is the lingering effects. The need for a program like STOP, the need for Tuesday's Children.
STOP is a very important organization that brings together survivors of tragedy.
STOP is the Survivors of Tragedy outreach program, and it was created out of an unfortunate necessity.
We have this immediate recognition in each other. There's a validation there. There's a sense that somebody understands what you've been through.
To be able to meet together and to walk through this together.
STOP members have been through these instances of violence.
I know following Jesse's murder, within the first few days, I thought I may not survive. And I wish that there was an organization like STOP then that could have helped guide me.
What I like about Tuesday's Children is that they just have a vast wealth of knowledge and experience.
STOP is raising awareness, not just of the fact that mass shootings, mass tragedies, terrorism, military conflict are happening, but we're raising awareness of the long-term effects of this.
And STOP is here to walk that journey with you.
The issue of mass violence is not going to go away.
When bad things are happening, look for the helpers.
Parents often say, you know, I'll never let this happen again, right? We can never let this happen again.
One person can do a lot, and you are that one person. So please join us so that we can come together and be part of the solution.
The next part of our program is our survivor panel discussion. We're going to hear from individuals impacted by tragedy and how they are using their voices in a variety of ways to create change for the general public and in communities directly impacted by mass tragedy. It is my honor and my privilege to introduce the next moderator, my dear friend, Monica Meehan McNamara. Monica has been the curriculum director of our international young adult program, Project Common Bond, for the past 16 years. She has facilitated our heart-to-heart retreats for our military surviving spouses, and she facilitates our Women's World Peace, which is an international retreat for military surviving spouses from Lebanon and France. She hails from Boston, where she is a family therapist. All the panelists can come up and join me.
As we are assembling, I wanted to say a few words. You know, today has been all about trauma and the impact of trauma. And it impacts different people in different ways. Sharing stories is a sacred act. And I know that, Harry, you mentioned it earlier, just the idea of being able to do that sometimes accounts for some healing. There's also always a risk, right? Will it be heard the right way? Will people respond and witness and take in a way that will support that individual? So to that extent, I wish people could move up in their seats so we're a little bit closer. Would that be okay to come on in so that we're not speaking out into empty spaces, but feel that you're a part of the witnesses here? To tell your story means, again, the possibility of being triggered in some way. Trauma means the worst thing that could happen did happen, and that rips the fabric of safety that we all want to hold on to in our lives. I'm going to assume that in our conversation today, where people are going to be telling their personal experience, there may be tears, and there may be some choice language that will go with it, and all of that is welcome. I might have a few words. I might have a few. Overall, this work and these individuals are a lesson for us about dignity. All of us possess dignity. It can't be taken away. It's a birthright. Through terrorism and the kind of traumatic losses that have happened, it's an assault on one's dignity. It doesn't negate it, but it definitely injures your dignity. Being in a group like this, coming together to share your stories, is a way of honoring dignity. And that's what I hope you'll listen for as we speak. I want this to be a conversation. And I think each individual has a different facet of an experience and a nuanced piece to share with us. And I'm hoping anybody will feel comfortable interrupting and just making sure that you get your points of view across, okay? So I would like each person to introduce themselves, and if you wouldn't mind, just a sentence about your loss. Go down the line.
These things. I didn't know if this was a microphone. I don't know. I mean, it's one. All right, well, we'll go. Like I said, I'm Harry Dunn. I am a member of the police force, and the attack at the Capitol on January 6th. I think I was a little lucky because of my stature and size that I didn't receive a lot of the physical injuries that a lot of my coworkers did. A couple scrapes, bumps and bruises, but the mental anguish that happened and continues to happen, and speaking up for my coworkers who can't speak up or choose not to, is why I'm here right now. So.
Lower that a little bit. I feel like I could sit under your arm. Tuck right in there. Krista Simpson Anderson. I am a wife, a mom of 2 boys, and the survivor of Staff Sergeant Michael Harrison Simpson. My husband was with 1st Special Forces Group out at Joint Base Lewis McChord and deployed to Eastern Afghanistan and was injured in an IED improvised explosive device attack on April 27, 2013, and passed away in Landstuhl, Germany on May 1st. And for the past 10 years, I've tried to be a voice for others and advocate for casualty reform and really educate on kind of planning for the unexpected, right? What I wish I would have done before, what I have seen other survivors endure after the fact, and how we could possibly negate those, the additional trauma that happens after when you're trying to kind of put the pieces back together. And that's it. Great. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jessica Alejandro. I lost my grandfather, Joseph Anthony Selkowitz, to COVID on March 8th, 2021. My father was also a 9/11 first responder. I am a COVID remembrance advocate as well as a mental health advocate. I work alongside my sister to have permanent memorials and temporary COVID memorials. Unfortunately, those of us within the COVID community, COVID survivors, my mother is a COVID long hauler who's joining us today. Our community has been forgotten, unfortunately, and kind of has been forgotten with the mandates and restrictions being lifted. So I actually really thank Tuesday's Children for inviting me to be part of the survivors panel and to be here to represent the COVID community, because our voices have been lost when, you know, everything has gone on. So thank you very much.
Greetings. My name is Dea. I am a post-war child coming from Kosovo and the war that happened in 1998 and 1999 back in the Balkans. I am a participant of Project Common Bond. That's what the connection with Tuesday Children is. And then I got also the chance to be a group leader. I am currently a Fulbright scholar and studying neuromarketing in Boston.
My name is Ryan. I lost my dad on 9/11. He worked in the North Tower on the 105th floor. I actually started with Tuesday's Children right after 9/11, so it's been nice to kind of come full circle now. And gotta be honest, like I remember doing the Met games because that was my biggest thing growing up. But aside from that, I definitely had kind of, I don't want to say distance, but kind of went through my own process of grieving to a degree. But being able to come back full circle, be reconnected like with Sarah, who's been helping me with my work right now. I'm a doctoral student. I'm in the 5th year of my cytology program. I'm up at the Albany VA. I'm on the PTSD clinic working with combat veterans. I'm returning from OEF, OIF, and New Dawn, which I love, but also my research looking at the experiences of 9/11 children and how their experiences have kind of been shaped or influenced by the collective narrative and meaning around 9/11 and how they're carving out their own personal process of grief and loss. And right now, currently working on my dissertation, which is looking at how the relationship before 9/11 with their parent impacts their ability to continue a bond or have a relationship or create one with their parent after 9/11. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. This is an awesome panel. I think one biggest thing I took away so far is pain sucks, but it is, it is very much a fundamental part of life and a necessity to lean into to understand how can you transcend past it, and a lot of stories of meaning emerge from that. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here and looking forward to a good discussion with everyone here.
Just to point out, and I'll go in line. So Harry, you had this very public event that quickly became a very political event, but then there's you personally needing to process it. And Chris, I know from our conversations, there was a kind of image of the military wife who is strong, who handles everything, takes care of everything when their spouses are away and deployed, and having to manage that image and your own personal grief, right? Jessica, you had a loss in the midst of the pandemic. So you had your grandfather died very shortly after the diagnosis. You're having to manage your own grief. You're not able to really be present for memorials, et cetera. And you have a constant reminder every day of what's going on and what the cause of that loss was. Dea, in speaking with you, I understood you were born into a whole country that was grieving and traumatized, having experienced torture and rape and a complete loss of the way of life that your community had. And so coming into that, inheriting a kind of cultural trauma and finding your way to manage that and also be present for the people in your family and around you. And again, Ryan, I think we know just as your work has shown us that the events of 9/11 were writ large. Everybody in the world knows about it, but they don't know your story and your process. You ended by saying pain sucks. Let's just talk about pain. You want to say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I think I've definitely spent a lot of time thinking and feeling that myself. For me, it's always felt like processing it growing up, I probably didn't process much of it. But I think what I came to realize a lot of the time now is it's really hard to separate pain from love. Like I can't think of the relationship with my dad. Ooh, damn, really. I can't think about that without the pain and love coinciding with each other. Thank you. And I think one of the lessons I learned, I mean, that slows down now.
I just like
And I think through, the work with the veterans that I've gotten to work with and through my own personal journey was kind of this voluntary exposure to your pain as an avenue of understanding that love and that relationship. For me, like the pain has been almost universal, like collective, but the grief's been very precise. And what I mean by that is I think everyone who has lost someone, there is just this piece that feels like it's yours and it's not supposed to be understood, but you want to hold on to it a little bit because it's that connection. And for me, when I started toying with that idea or letting myself feel that, it was really hard to separate pain and love. And what I realized is to move as close as you can to the pain as that avenue through it, and to learn to understand and coincide with it. So like when we were talking about resiliency early and even in this forum, like it's trying to figure out how do you define what resiliency is? And I think like what definition I came up for, at least for me, was reliving your experiences of the past without this desire or yearning to want to change them, but reliving those experiences with the desire and motivation to change your perspectives and as a way to change yourself and allowing some meaning to emerge from that each time that you're willing to do that. And as a result, you start to string along a thread of different meaning. And as a result of that, you develop your own story. And I think for me, that's been, it's a process, but it also, it's a generative process that doesn't exist without the pain. And so while it sucks, it's necessary. And that's what I meant by it's universal. I don't think, it's really hard to describe anything else other than pain. Like we have all these other words we could put on top of it, but it is, for me at least, a fundamental part of life. But it also, you can't talk about love without pain, and love doesn't have the same meaning without pain. And for me, that is the relationship, at least I had with my dad growing up, and that I continue to take with me.
And you were 7, about to turn 8.
I turned 8 4 days later on the 15th.
Yeah. And I want to shift to you, Krista, because you spoke about what it meant to have 2 young children and manage through a funeral and a loss and the tension between protecting and supporting.
Thank you. You do know me. I feel seen. Yeah, my children were 1 and 3, and I joke that if you look at the pictures of the funeral, if you didn't see what was around me, you might think I was at a wedding, because I was, I told everybody, if you're going to wail, get to the back, right? I don't want my children to be re-traumatized by the funeral, of their father. And I was smiling and caring for them and really kind of pushing all of my feelings down. And I think over time, being able to realize that it was a couple months after my husband died, and I sat in my friend's, we talked about this, I sat in my friend's house and I said, oh, when is this pain ever going to go away? And she said, which to your point, she said, if you could get rid of all the pain, but that meant that you had to get rid of all the love that Mike brought to your life, would you do it? No, never. And so I reframed my perspective on what that pain was. Now that pain does equal love. And the moment that I stopped feeling the pain of his loss, and the moment that I stopped allowing my children to feel the pain of their father's loss, is the moment we lose them.
Were you going to say something?
No, interesting, the whole thing about the pain sucks. And, you know, I was doing little, you know, when I go to therapy, it's interesting, I kind of like, in my therapist, you know, she's talking and I'm asking her questions. And it's like, wait a minute, that's not what I'm supposed to be doing. But I've realized when does the pain end and stuff like that. And one thing I've realized about with this whole thing with January 6th is I don't know if I want to get over it. Like, I don't know if I want to heal from it. And that sounds like, why would you not want to get over it? You want to feel better, right? Not exactly, because the pain, the anger is fueling what you see right now. If I was over it and happy, I wouldn't be sitting here right now. But it's kind of like reshape my perspective. It's given me this whole new outlook and this perspective of life. And I got something else I got to do. And the minute I get over it, you know, does that fire go away? And I kind of equate it to people grieving the loss of a loved one. The minute that you no longer feel that in your heart anymore, does that mean that you forgot about that person? So is that why we grieve so long and hold on? Because you say, you know what, I'm over it. And with that, it's a fear that that person's gone. It's a realization that they're really gone the moment that you don't feel that pain anymore. So yeah, pain sucks, but you reshaped your perspective, and I love that because that's what I'm going to do, because I don't want to heal from this. As crazy as that sounds, I want to get a hold on it and drive it in the direction that I want to. So.
Jessica, I would love it if you would share a little bit about the kind of grief process that you had to go through that then got you looking to start programs to bring support that were missing, maybe.
So my sister and I, we attended Queens College for New Yorkers. And during that time, I was in my second semester of graduate school. My sister was, you know, on the tail end of her bachelor studies, her undergrad studies. And, you know, she was actually in class when we got the call that, you know, he actually, let me backtrack. There's 3 dates that stick in my head. February 22nd was when he tested positive. The 28th was when he was hospitalized. And then March 8th, 2021 is when he passed away. So from date of diagnosis to his date of passing, it was 15 days. And within that time, his health rapidly deteriorated. You know, the day that he was actually ventilated, my sister was in her class. I was waiting to enter my class, and you know, we saw him on FaceTime. We got to talk to him. He was more like himself than he has been, you know, the past week. You know, and during that time, you know, we said our I love yous, we laughed and everything. He was an avid fisherman. We're like, come on, we got to go out on the boat. You got to come back. We got to go to Puerto Rico. We got to do these things. And he's like, yeah, I'll be fine. Like, I'm good. Like, I'm strong. I got this. You know, he was a Marine veteran. He was a Bostonian. So, you know, if you know anybody from Boston, you can attest to it. Very, you know, strong individuals. And if anybody could have overcome this, it was him. And during that time, you know, we said our I love yous and everything, and within a half hour, his vitals and everything changed. And we got that FaceTime call asking us permission to ventilate him. And, you know, being a college student, also, you know, watching him suffer through a phone screen, it was a lot. Grateful to the support system we had at the college, but unfortunately, those of us within, you know, the community of mental health and everything can attest to mental health resources being the first to go when budget cuts are made. So it was great having a counselor at the college, but our college didn't take into the account. And I actually had somebody at the college say, you know, my sister and I were just two of over 19,000 matriculated students. And he was like, I'm so glad you brought this to our attention that we need more, you know, COVID-related support, because we didn't think about this. And to us, it was like, well, we think about it every day. We, you know, we went through the same pandemic, but we didn't go through the same pandemic. And nobody can really understand the magnitude of our grief within the COVID community unless you watched your loved ones suffer through a phone screen, or, you know, their bodies not being recovered because they were in Potter's Field, you know, for New Yorkers. So my sister and I, through our depression, we decided to create a virtual COVID mental health group for students at the college. And we partnered with New York Project Hope with a crisis counselor. And we did that. And we were part of a national COVID memorial remembrance organization. And we had the first temporary COVID memorial in New York, at any city university, state university, or private college in New York City. And I'm proud to say that my sister and I fought long and hard to have a permanent COVID memorial at our college as well, which is, you know, there today. But as, you know, myself and Monica spoke about, as cathartic as it was initially to be part of these initiatives and create these initiatives as someone who was grieving and helping others, it hindered my grieving process. And I discovered that later on, you know, when I'm just sitting there and I'm trying to figure out how to help somebody, and you know, we can all attest to nights being the worst when you are by yourself, especially after losing a loved one, you know, when the calls stop coming in, you know, and the check-ins stop coming in, and you're sitting by yourself at night and you're trying to figure out what to do. So you know, we spoke about there being a fine line between, you know, partaking in initiatives to help others, you know, who have that common bond, but also understanding that at times that fine line can be blurred and you can hinder your grief while trying to navigate it at the same time.
And we're going to come back to that, but I think that's just such an important piece of information for all of us who are in the helping profession, who have gone through something like this, to be able to take care of yourself in a process, want to do something, but also include what your needs are. Thea, I know you spoke a lot about the fact that the traumatized community that you were born into felt the need for protection. Maybe you elaborate a little bit on that.
Yesterday, 2 days ago, when we were talking, it was a retrospective of everything that sort of happened. And to reflect, my country got independence in 2008. So I was born right after the war ended. And I was at a time when there were barely any schools because they were all burned down. The majority of the books that were in Albanian were burned. So I grew up for my first years not having access to certain books, to certain CDs, those being imported from all over the world, or only a few people that managed to travel abroad to bring materials for young kids to learn the ABCs or to learn counting. I remember that we used to take beans that are used for cooking, and then we would learn numbers via that. So definitely it was it was the whole journey, especially for the kids after the war, of being exposed to multiple certain realities, the reality of a country that is being very pro-American and hugging the American spirit and methods of creating institutions. On the other side, having the whole major institutions and the government and schools being established by internationals and bringing a whole new energy, which is not necessarily parallel to all the traditions that the Balkans had. And also the people that were torn from the war, including my family, because I had my grandfather lost, and everyone that was touched because there were nearly 1 million people deported, 120,000 people killed, 20,000 people lost, over 120,000 women being raped or sexually abused. So there is a whole community, the whole country that has a story behind, but they know that they have no other choice but to keep on pushing and to keep on walking and looking forward. Even if that means that they're going to teach young kids numbers from 1 till 10 with beans, or even if that means that women need to quiet their voices down about what they have experienced, because maybe even their husbands didn't know what happened to their bodies, but they have to keep on pushing because of certain stigmas, because of certain situations. So I think that definitely is, it's challenging, especially to be in the midst of multiple languages on the way how we heal and the way how we try to move on. And sometimes it comes clashing. Sometimes it brings a lot of love, especially if you're a young child, and everyone's sort of finding kids as a way of healing from the loss that they have experienced, from husbands to fathers to grandfathers. So definitely I was brought up in an environment full of love, but it was definitely the type of love that we were talking before. Love filled with pain, as considering that pain was the price that everyone paid for love and for wanting to keep up that identity of being to having nationality on the back and protecting the flag and protecting the nation, so on and so forth.
Right. So it goes into so many levels and so many people impacted on any one experience. Let's talk a little bit about what you discovered along the way, all of you, about kind of supports. Ryan, I'm thinking about you because you shared something that we've heard a lot of young people in Project Common Bond say, that they were invited into therapy and did not want to be there. And you said you found many ingenious ways to be in the office, but not in the process.
Yeah, I said before, I was like the Will Hunting of 9/11 kids. I was really good at not talking or finding ways not to show up. I mean, I think I always said like I hated therapy so much that I decided to become a psychologist. But I mean, for me, it was I definitely wasn't ready to talk about anything. I mean, I know early on, like the grief felt like it was mine. Like I didn't want to share it, and I didn't want to let go of it. But I also processed a lot of things internally, for the worse, probably more than the good. But I think in retrospect, it allowed me to sit with a lot of the more difficult emotions and feel more comfortable sitting with them and then work through them. I think I've come to understand, at least, and I mean, even if I put my researcher hat on for a second, the literature points to grief's a motivational state that it's interesting because it taps into the part of our brain that drives us for social connection, but also drives us for addiction as well. Which is interesting because you could pursue the sake of pain just for the sake of pursuing it, where then it becomes compulsive, or you can pursue the sake of pain for connecting with others. And I think it was part of that journey that really helped me. And circling back a little bit, I mean, I know my mom's watching somewhere, so she's probably crying, but she just cries at everything now. But she early on very much instilled in us, like, you can have this experience and it can be very painful, but it's not going to be an excuse for you not to be able to move forward. Remember, I talked to Sarah about it right after 9/11 when Tuesday's children came to buy and they were dressed as elves and they dropped off all these toys that look like FAO shorts in our living room. But the next day, or it was a year after, whatever it was, but my mom made us pick 3 toys each and then donate the rest to charity.
Yeah.
And I mean, you're 8 years old, so you don't really get, you're just pissed.
Right.
But in retrospect, I mean, I think it shaped, I mean, I know it shaped a lot of kind of the ways I look at things, where I kind of pursue things, or my own kind of painful experiences or emotions, is just pay attention, like, what's happening between the lines, not what's being said. It's the process and the gesture of the behavior behind what they're doing, not so much kind of the objective, tangential things of the toys. And for me, I think that's what shaped me, really looking at the meaning of things, not so much what's just the objective experience, what has happened, but how has it shaped the way you kind of look at the world and how you understand and I guess transcend your experiences.
Thank you. Krista, I'd love to hear your thoughts on what helped and what the struggle was in terms of having the emotions and wondering if you were doing it right.
I'm still wondering that. Thank you. You know, that's such I connect with your mom for sure, because what I often say is we want to encourage our survivors, not entitle them. So encourage and empower. And you know, my kids, I'm remarried. I got married to another Green Beret because I didn't learn my lesson the first time. And so collectively, my kids have 9 grandparents. So you can imagine what Christmas and birthdays and, you know, all of that I have to, you know, my husband tells his parents, like, perishable. If it's perishable, that they can have it, you know, they can eat it or it'll break within days, then that's fine. But I think that, you know, some of the things that in the beginning, I am a very faithful person, but I did not want to hear he's in a better place. Mm-hmm. Because why isn't that better place here with me and my 1 and 3-year-old? Mm-hmm. Why can't he be a father to my children? And I was never angry. I think I skipped that. And that was the other thing that we talked about, or, you know, the 10 stages of grief, or however many of those were. When I would look at those, I would think, I'm doing it wrong. You know, I missed this step, or, and so I was always concerned. You can't imagine that I'm somewhat of a type A personality, I'm sure. And so I wanted to do this widow thing perfect. And then, of course, being a mom of 2 little survivors, I wanted to do that perfect as well. And it doesn't have to be perfect when you're vulnerable, right?
Yep. I remember that.
I do. And so I think just taking day by day for me and learning from people that have gone before me or even after me that have learned something that I maybe should have learned 10 years ago, but also over the years, realizing and just keeping myself open to new things, you know, and just adding those to my toolbox, I think was, I hope that answered your question.
Oh, yeah. No, you've said your faith was important,
Mm-hmm.
and in particular at one Mass.
Yes. So in our church, there was a year of mercy. And I just remember kind of getting into like January and then February, and then all of a sudden realizing, wow, God was really merciful that he didn't make Mike come home so broken, you know? I mean, he had so many injuries, and I see these veterans that come home with even worse than what Mike had, right? So the first question was, well, how come they get to come home and Mike didn't, right? His injuries weren't as bad as this person. But you know, I remember being in the hospital, and the last night after, you know, they declared him, and then he was donating his organs, and so I got to, you know, the ICU beds are really small. That's my next advocacy project. Move him over so I can lay in bed with him for the one last night. And the nurse came in and she said, "I'm going to clean him up," which was so amazing. I mean, he was, by all rights, he was dead, and she was going to change his dressings and clean him and just care for him still. So I helped her, and I said, I could do this for the rest of my life, but could I have? Mm-hmm. And so maybe he was merciful to me too.
Right, finding the humanness in all of this, and not the perfection, but what can I do and where am I best suited to doing that?
Right.
Yeah.
So I guess he thought I was best suited to fight for everything.
Yeah. Yeah. Daya, sorry. I'm going to keep coming at you. You were saying that it was years later that therapy made sense to you, but first it was to ask a therapist to tell you what the process was like for somebody else.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Therapy, even nowadays, is quite a taboo back home. I grew up and I finished almost high school without ever meeting a psychologist. A psychologist was never a common thing back home because we were at a stage in the country where we're sort of trying to figure out how to build roofs and how to make streets so we can go from point A to point B, how to sort of camouflage all the bullets that were in the major monuments and major buildings across the city. So really to be doing all of that and then thinking of sitting down and talking for an hour with a psychologist, people would be like, we have other things to do. It was only at the time when I went for my undergraduate studies in London that it was mandatory for us at the field of neuromarketing to meet a psychologist, and that was my first point in touch. After a while, certain things happening, I have been developing a pattern, which I think that it was sort of socially and culturally imprinted within me, of always being ready to say yes and to give a hand to anyone who's asking without sort of refiltering within oneself if I can handle it and am I the right person to do it? Because after the war, sort of everyone was helping everyone. Even a child was helping an adult one way or the other. And at the point that I had my first personal therapy session, I went and asked, can I undergo through therapy for someone else that does not have the courage or the desire to sit down and talk for themselves? And at that point, it sort of was a flag to the psychologist that was like, yes, we might sort of figure that one on the way, but it seems like you're the one needing it, because why do you want to sit down for someone else? And that unveiled certain signals on the way.
I mean, we keep hearing that, the desire to help, that out of pain, the desire to help and give back, and the need for help. And Jessica, you have spoken about that and have become a real advocate for mental health.
Yeah, so actually I was selected as one of 400 applicants. I was one of 30, selected by Mental Health America last year to speak at their annual mental health conference. So my segment was a virtual segment, so I was recorded, but I attended in Washington, and it was called Coping with COVID Using Grief to Create Change. And I spoke about you know, my experiences with depression and anxiety and, you know, really trying to hone in on what I was feeling and figure it out while the rest of us were trying to figure out what, you know, this virus was and what just happened and, you know, all of these things. So I've done that. And then, you know, like I mentioned before, on top of creating the mental health, you know, virtual groups and things like that, you know, it's definitely helped a lot, but it came about in an unfortunate way. You know, during my time, like I mentioned, you know, my sister and I were going through our own grieving process that we didn't understand. And I can relate to this whole grief being this one pretty printed blueprint picture, you know, and you have to do this and you have to feel this, and then you're feeling this, but you're also feeling this, and you can't really identify what you're feeling, but also you don't want to talk to the people around you, your family, because they have their own grieving process and you don't want to hinder their grieving process. So it becomes very complicated, you know, and trying to navigate that. And it was very unfortunate that I had to go through such a significant loss to make the changes and get that remembrance for our COVID community that weren't otherwise there. You know, I did it through my grief, and it wasn't necessarily something that I wanted to do, something that my sister wanted to do, but we had to create programs and supports that we needed, that we knew that other students at our college needed. You know, I also started, I'm an educator as well. I'm a substitute for the New York City Department of Education. And, you know, there's a program called NYC Men Teach, and it supports men of minority groups who are, you know, interested in becoming educators. And I actually, with the chapter at my school, created a virtual biweekly men's support group as well, because that's a whole other area we can talk about, men's mental health and the stigma. We have such a stigma around mental health to begin with. Let's not get into that. That's a whole book that you can write about.
Yeah.
You know, but yeah, I'm just trying to figure that out.
And Harry, you mentioned, you know, being in public forums, being on TV, being this man of stature, a policeman, or yes, and crime, and reckoning with those two images that in our culture are pretty contradictory, right?
Yeah. I don't really care what people are going to say or think about me. I don't mind showing my vulnerability and my soft side, right? I'm 6'7", and I can fight really good too. So if you want to tease me, I'll knock you out. Like, you know, so like, just don't get it twisted right now. You know, this teddy bear until I'm not, right? You know. You know, one thing I wrote down earlier, the people that we become after trauma and incidents like this and loss, it's often it's not because it's a choice. The people that we are now, it's not because we chose to be that person. We chose to become, we became that person as a method of survival, you know, when dealing with this grief and loss and trauma and sadness and anger, this hodgepodge of emotions. I had to set boundaries with people. I didn't want to talk to anybody. I didn't want to talk to certain people. I'll talk, but I'll talk on my terms. A lot of people have said, I'm thankful for your voice. Thank you for speaking for all of us. Thank you for giving us a voice. And that sentiment is very well received. It's nice. But in my mind, I just want to say, I'm not speaking for you. I'm glad that it resonates with you. This is my story, right? I'm so thankful that it does resonate with you, and I'll continue to do it, but this is my story, and I don't want to share my experience is not yours. Yeah. We could have done the same exact thing, or the same. Our experiences are different, and they are our own. They're individuals, and that's why I encourage everybody to tell their story and not be quiet about it. So.
Yeah, and you've had plenty of people telling you your story. actually isn't your story and it didn't happen.
And
But
that's fine. I don't care if you believe me or not. It's not for you to believe. I don't care.
I
This is
say it.
no.
You're gonna fight now.
No. But that's the thing. Like, but no, that's the thing. Like, but people will challenge or value. It's not that bad. How many times you heard that? It's not that bad,
Right.
or it could be worse. Yeah. Thankfully it wasn't this. Well, you know what? It was
get
that,
over it.
but it was this, and this is how it's bothering me.
Yeah.
So it's not our job to present it to you in a way that you believe it.
Right.
It's not our job.
Right.
I wanted to comment on that too. You know, speaking on, the COVID community, we lived through this unfactual rhetoric. It became very politicized and, as a New Yorker who lives in Queens, which was the epicenter of the nation for a very, very long time, to still be a New Yorker and have watched that suffering happen, those refrigerated trucks with dead bodies in them, clapping, those New Yorkers, 7 o'clock, right? We were outside our windows clapping and screaming for our healthcare workers and everything. You'd see the posters on social media, on the buses, on the taxis, on the TV, on the newspapers, everything was around you. And yet we were constantly filled with this rhetoric that it did not happen, And, I was thinking of you and like your husband too. My father is a correction officer. When you hear in law enforcement and everything, military services, oh, well, I'm so sorry, but, they knew that was a possibility, like with the job, exactly. Like, you knew what you were getting into, So just that just sparked that in me because we relate to that and we talk about that all the time in our family, just like constantly being belittled all the time. And even like sitting, on this panel and, we all live through trauma and our grief, and grief is not linear, as we know, and grief never escapes. You live with grief and you grow around grief. Grief does not disappear, but just that common bond of, just the belittling of our experiences and everything. And like Officer Dunn said, we really need to take into account, no, you believe what you believe, but this is what I went through. And that doesn't make it any less. So having that validation, from someone else outside of my community, is very important.
Oh, yes.
I actually had a dear friend at the time say to my casualty assistance officer, I wish you would have known her before. She was different. I mean, no truer statement has ever been said, right? But I felt so guilty and defeated, and how do I get back the person that I was? Well, if that was possible, then Mike would be here. I wouldn't be with you right now. I mean, we would not be having this conversation. And so I had to reframe that and be proud of the person that I became and the grief that I carried. And, for me, it's interesting because my support was amazing. I mean, from our casualty assistance officer to the unit, to the Army, to Survivor Outreach Services, to OSD, to the, our local community, our family, my therapist, who was the only reason why I cried, because when we left JBLM, and, no one ever told me that I was, everybody always said to me, like, oh my, I can't believe what was it like? You were 35, you were a widow and a mother of a 1- and 3-year-old. So I always felt like people were kind of giving me those accolades, if you will. Oh, look at you, you're so strong. But there's a downside to that, because there were times I just didn't want to be strong.
Because we've been touching on the importance of telling your story, you came to participate in Project Common Bond, which is a program international and U.S., and bringing young people together who have had a loss due to terrorism or military conflict or mass violence. And there are small groups that meet every day, and if participants want to share their story, they will. You're arriving from, again, a background where opening up is not necessarily safe or supported, and into Project Common Bond you arrive.
There was this general incentive of being strong, but strong as in avoiding the topic, because the whole situation back home was so present in everyone that it was over redundant if we were to speak about the war or what had happened, because everyone knew and felt it on their own skin, one way or the other. So usually back home, the system would have been of having a very defensive and non-proactive approach towards what the war has caused, and avoiding the conversation of it, not incentivizing anything that is related to opening up or being vulnerable about the situation, and usually creating activities or communal events, women getting together, cooking being something that would connect them, religion in some other cases, men working and providing and feeling that masculinity sort of flourishing after the war, because everyone doing their own bit. When I was invited at PCB, I thought that having a lost member close to the family was simply a checklist to get into PCB. And to be honest, the first few days, I expected that all we're going to do is do therapy without mentioning our losses, without discussing what happened, simply finding other reasons to go around the wound but not touch the actual event, and to get our minds off of really what happened. When I came to PCB at the dignity groups, people started sharing, and it was not easy in the beginning, especially for the first 2-3 days, because every time that I was going back to the room, I was asking questions to my mom about her father and about the whole event, and figuring out questions that shed her to tears, and having conversations that we never had before. And that was the first time of facing truth, and it was the first time of facing history, and it was maybe some of the first times when we as a family learned that the only way to actually heal in a space that has a lot of agitation is to maybe, just like a wound, if there is something that really does not belong there, you need to take it out in order for you to come out a little bit stronger or softer. So we did a lot of digging. It was not easy, and especially it was not easy having to learn empathy in a new way, of stepping into other people's shoes, of people that have lost maybe their parents or very loved ones, either in war, in acts of terrorism, and having them experience that in various time periods. Yeah. So definitely, I think that there is a lot of courage in keeping it within yourself and not talking about it, but there is definitely more courage into being able to speak up about it. And if this panel would have happened in the capital city, people would be in absolute awe, because it's very non-traditional. And I think that any step forward to it, it's a huge leap for the nation and that whole mentality that it represents.
You know, we keep talking about the idea of pain and love being so connected. And I think the idea of vulnerability as being the source of strength too, not like strong, but the one that comes out of really touching on that place that is so hard. I'm getting flagged. So if we can just go, Brian, from you, a few words about your thoughts about resilience, and we have to keep it quick.
Yeah, sorry, I'll try to keep it quick. I kind of circling back to what we talked about before. For me, I know we had talked about, I never felt resilient. Like the word never really resonated with me. And I never really thought myself as a victim or a survivor. It was just, this was my experience. Like I can't imagine it could be anything else because this is just what it is. But for me, resilience, I think for me, I guess it would be the ability to go back in experiences in your past without the temptation of wanting to change them, but to change yourself in the way that you look at them. When I think about resiliency, I also think about not sentiment, memory, and I don't think memory is just to remember, it's to plan to the future. So that is why we recall things, but it's what we're recalling, and for me, that's been, a lot of it has been going back to the places I visited with my dad, going back to ground zero, creating memorials for myself, since, I mean, we don't have a body to go to or a gravesite. But it's been that journey. For me, that's resilience. It's the continual voluntary exposure of exposing yourself to things you don't want to expose yourself to without looking to change the past of the things you've been through.
Dea, just a few words.
I tried to be poetic when I was thinking about this. And I like the analogy of it's a symphony of courage, where you have to enjoy the song, even where the song is quite silent, or even when it's very beautiful, and just enjoying the whole process from A till B.
Thank you.
I think, like we spoke about, when you hear the word resilience, you know, by definition means overcoming something big. And to me, in my experiences with losing my papa, resilience has come through as those small victories. My resilience is him. It's, you know, writing a letter to the city last year about a permanent COVID memorial and the city sending a tone-deaf response that it was premature and I should wait until the last COVID death or 20 years. It's, you know, wearing a mask but still being asked, why are you wearing a mask? It's just like a cold now. It's not having these memorials and, you know, that acknowledgement of him. It's telling the story of my best friend that I lost that I'll never get back. So resilience looks very different from, you know, all of us.
Yeah, thank you.
As a military spouse, we don't like the word because even though I think because often they say, you know, oh, military spouses have to be resilient or you are resilient. I don't think contrary, I think, to popular belief, I don't think you're born with it. I think you have to practice it, and you have to practice it intentionally. You know, I can say that the pain that I feel today about the loss of my husband is just as great as it was 10 years ago, but I recover from it a little bit faster and a little bit easier because I practice it. So my husband's incident happened just a couple of weeks after the Boston Marathon bombing, and my father was actually about 200 yards away from the bomb. And so today when Amy spoke, I connected with that, and what he said, my husband had sent my father an email, and he said, make no mistake, you will never forget that day for the rest of your life. He said, I'm sure you will think of it almost every day, for in the near future, you will start to look at things in a different frame of mind. Things that used to be important won't be. Things that used to be trivial won't be. Don't get upset with people if they don't see things the way you do. They haven't experienced what you saw, haven't experienced what you did. I encourage you to take some time and reflect on your life in the future. Dwelling on the past is for losers. Excuses are for the weak. Think to the future, the summer, your grandchildren, daughter, wife, and ocean. Compartmentalization is an option, not the best. Don't carry guilt with you, it's toxic. I would encourage you to talk to someone, anyone about it. Your friends might not understand, your priest might have some encouraging words, your wife wants to nurture you. Don't shut them out, but don't get upset if they just don't get it. If you need to just let some stuff out, shoot me an email or call my dad. That guy has almost every been there, done that t-shirt and the wisdom to go along with it. I hope I have not overstepped my bounds. My intentions are not to judge or offer unwanted advice, but let you know that you are not alone. I look forward to seeing you again in a few months. Don't worry about me. Things are actually very good, about as good as they can be. The locals are friendly, and we have knitting circles on Wednesdays, arts and crafts on Fridays, and movie nights on Saturdays.
Thank you so much.
Okay. When I was making the decision to speak out, continuing to speak out, being ostracized privately behind my back, the weirdest thing happened to me. I love listening to music. And at this point of my grieving process, I was angry, really angry. So I listened to a lot of rap music and some hip hop, and just, I was in my thug stage. I was like, F everybody, right? So the way, randomly, I put my Bluetooth on and I just press play. I don't even have my phone, and it starts playing. And Whitney Houston's "The Greatest Love of All" came on. Song, but it was like not what I was, how the hell did this end up on my Whitney Houston? And I do a song, I heard it before. When I was a young kid, I thought it was some mushy love song, right? But then as an adult, I actually listened to the words, and it stood out, and it says, "I decided long ago never to walk in anyone's shadow. If I fail, if I succeed, at least I lived as I believe. No matter what they take from me, they can't take away my dignity." And I was like, holy shit. I thought I was like, you got, rewind. Whitney Houston been talking to me this whole time, and I didn't even know it. Because it just resonated with me. This is me, and my moral compass from that day has been facing north. And I'm good, because I know what I'm doing in my heart is right. And
Yep.
all these years, Whitney was talking to me. She wrote that song for me, so resilient.
I think she wrote it for everybody here. And I want to thank all of you for being as generous as you've been with us and really sharing something so precious and personal. I think a reason we do this is to take a word like resilience and pull it apart. Does it work? Does it not work? Right? Because we use those words so frequently, but we need to hear it from the inside out, and you've all given us that. So thank you so much.
I think I speak for all of us when I say that was a tremendous panel. And I just want to build on what Harry just said about the greatest love of all in that song. I've known Monica for years, and I've been in like the dignity model sessions and stuff. She's done trainings with our staff. And I've always thought of that song when I think of the dignity model, except I think of the Eddie Murphy version from Coming to America. And he's like, my dignity. So, yes, come on, Harry.
So I hope you don't mind. I just asked for one more second of something that I wanted to share with you all. I wrote a book. It's coming out October 24th. And I was skimming through it, and I was trying to find something, excerpt from it to share with you all today. And may I share it with you all? Well, I'm going to. I hope y'all don't mind. There's a little profanity in it. Forgive me. This is me speaking from my heart. Your mind takes you through so much after something like that. I didn't know it before my therapy, but when people go through these situations, it's normal to beat yourself up. We blame ourselves. You feel sadness. You feel shame. And it takes a while, and it takes therapy to help you realize that the folks who attacked you bear the responsibility for what you're going through, not you. Why should we feel sadness when they hurt us? Why do we have to find this strength when we didn't do anything wrong? Our emotions are responding to something that was done to us. You learn that you've got to start putting the blame on people who did this to us. Don't blame me. Y'all fuckers are the one who ought to be ashamed of yourselves. Don't be mad at yourself. You just reacted. They are the ones who did something irresponsible. Why are you sad? We were attacked. Your body is reacting to something that was done to it. That's why it's all right not to be all right. Not to be all right is normal. When you get hot, you start sweating, and there's nothing you can do about it. It's normal. Your body is reacting. When you're cold, how do you stop being cold? How do you stop shivering? You get warm. How do you stop hurting? You get right. We've got to be kind to ourselves and put the blame where it belongs. I want to share that with you.
Thank you, Harry. And I think all of the panelists' remarks were just really profound. So thank you all for sharing your vulnerability with us and your hearts. And I hope we greeted you with dignity. We're going to take a short break now, but we're also going to show a video about Project Common Bond for anybody who wants to stay in the room and see that. If you want to get up and stretch your legs, pet a dog, go ahead and do it. And those of you who are online, we will resume at 2:15 with our next keynote. Thank you.
So it's truly my honor and privilege to be able to stand in front of you today, and we are going to talk a little bit in a moment about storytelling. We wanted to ask Matthew to join us, and he's going to tell us a little bit about his story. So I want to leave that to him. But I do want to say that I've been with Tuesday's Children since 2006, and there have been a lot of books that have come out, and I oftentimes make a lot of introductions to a lot of places, bookstores and the like, and Matthew's was the first one to be welcomed into the bookstore that we work with. So congratulations, Matthew. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for changing your flight from Florida to be here today.
All right. Hi, everyone. Can I move this, or do you want me to speak? Is it better to speak into this?
Anything you need.
Can everyone hear me okay?
For the visual and all the
Yeah, okay. Sorry, Zoom. My name is Matt Bocchi. It's a pleasure to be here today. Like Sarah said, I flew up here this morning. I was supposed to come here tomorrow, and when we started talking about everything that was going on here, I made it my effort to make this work. And to be up here this time of year, and I don't know about some of you, but today is like the perfect New York City day, and it in many ways reminds me of the morning of 9/11. It was such a beautiful day. I'm gonna tell a little bit about my story, about my dad, what I do now, and my goal in what I do now. Many of us in here were affected by the morning of 9/11 and that day and everything that unfolded. For me, I was in 4th grade. I was 9 years old. I got pulled out of my classroom at 9 a.m. Walk in the hallway, I see my younger brother, Nick, and our teachers start to tell us that a plane hit our dad's building. They're evacuating the tower and that he's safe. As a child, you always believe your elders, you believe your teachers, your parents. What they tell you is fact. And so I didn't think anything of it, and I just said, okay. And I found it odd that they brought me into another room, which we all called the computer room, to play computer games for 2 hours. And I walked by my classroom and I saw kids looking at me as the superintendent was telling them what was going on. And the faces that they were making as they were looking at me, they expressed concern, but they were children themselves, right? I had no idea. I also had no idea that at 8:49 in the morning, 3 minutes after the plane hit my dad's building, my dad called my mom. And leading up to 9/11, he had this, in my experience, my opinion, this spiritual experience. I had my own spiritual experience that brought me to do what I'm doing today. But my dad had said to my mom that he wanted to be cremated when he died. He said that he wanted to quit his job and find his true happiness and his passion. And my mom turned to him and said, "John, you're 38 years old. Why are you talking like this?" And leading up to the weekend before 9/11, he said, I'm going to finally do it. I'm going to quit. So at 8:49 in the morning, when his cell phone caller ID popped up on the phone, she thought he walked out, right? My mom picks up the phone and my dad says, Michelle, do you have the TV on? We think a small plane hit the building. My dad was known to pull pranks and jokes on people, so she starts to say, John, this better not be some sort of sick joke. And as she finishes that sentence, the line cuts out. She changes the channel on the TV and sees the smoke coming out of his building. He was on the 105th floor of the North Tower at Cantor Fitzgerald, had no way out that day. Frantically, she's crying, starts calling him. He'd pick up the phone and she'd hear nothing but static. He kept calling her and she'd pick up and hear nothing but static. And finally, he got through to her one last time and he just said, Michelle, I don't know if you can hear me. You're the love of my life and I'll love you forever. And she said, I love you. And the line cut out. In between those phone calls, my mom had called my grandparents who lived in Fort Lee at the time. They're poor Italian immigrants. They didn't speak much English. And so when my nonna was looking at the TV and seeing the smoke coming out of my dad's building, and she started screaming and crying, my uncle, my dad's younger brother, ran upstairs and saw the smoke coming out and knew my dad wasn't going to get out of that building. He walked into the kitchen and started calling my dad's cell phone. He said he called him probably 50 times in a 2-minute span. So it seemed like that at least. And when he had given up all hope that he would never talk to him again, my dad picked up the phone. And they were 15 years apart in age. And the relationship started to grow in that last year. My uncle had an internship downtown and they would have lunch downtown by the World Trade Center. And my dad picked up the phone like it was one of those days, like they were meeting for lunch. And he just calmly said, hello. And my uncle said, John, get out. And he just said, Tony, I love you. And to our knowledge, that's the last person that we know of that spoke to my dad on the outside. My mom kept me in school because of those phone calls, because everyone in my family was rushing to the house. But when I got home from school that day, I walked inside, and when I got to the house, I saw all these cars parked at weird angles. This is what I talk about in my book. It looked like a rushed crime scene in a sense. My family, being a big Italian family, always celebrated holidays and birthdays, and so it didn't feel like that. You walked inside, you saw people on cell phones, on the house phone, calling hotlines, and so many adults crying. And I walked into the living room where the TV was, and I saw the footage for the first time. And I saw the second plane hitting the second building. I saw the buildings coming down, and I saw an image, and I talk about this because for many years I was lost as a child of 9/11. I felt like I couldn't talk about what I was feeling or what I had witnessed and how I couldn't process my grief and my emotions the right way. What I had seen was someone falling to their death. And knowing where they were falling from, I had been in my dad's office countless times. I thought, why are they doing this? Don't they realize that they're going to be saved? It didn't occur to me that they didn't have a way out. And so I struggled in the years that followed. I struggled because I couldn't understand what I had seen that day. I couldn't understand everything that I had been told. My mom, they found my dad miraculously. But everything I was told by my mom just seemed convenient. I didn't want to accept that what she said was the truth, because to me, it seemed like there had to be a greater story out there. And I started seeing all these Good Samaritan stories that were coming out. I was convinced I'd find my own story of my dad. And so I started to piece together what happened that day. I knew the phone calls, the last one probably happened right before 9 in the morning, and they found him. And what they told us was that he was most likely alive when the building came down, and he was alive one moment and gone the next. So I said to myself, well, I have now an hour and a half roughly gap to fill in. And I embarked on this quest to try to fill in that gap. And it was impossible. I was naive. I was a kid. And it led me down a path of pain in many ways. Fortunately for me, I suffered sexual abuse at the hands of a relative who preyed on my vulnerability in trying to find out what happened to my dad. And I found out the answers in the years that came. But in that moment, when I was going through everything I was going through, I started to use drugs and alcohol to cope. It was the easier, softer way. The moment I had a drink or a drug in my body, I was no longer looked at as the kid who lost his dad in 9/11. I was just a normal kid. I was a normal teenager and then a normal adult. And so what I do today I'm now over 8 years sober, and what I do today is talk about my story in many ways. I talk about it to raise awareness for what all of us 9/11 children went through. We're adults. I thought that my story was so unique, not for the things that I went through, but the emotions and the feelings I felt regarding 9/11. I had never received so many messages, texts, emails, Instagram messages from other children saying that they went through the same thing. They looked at the footage too. They looked at videos and pictures and all these different things. I thought I was so alone in all of that. Because even my closest best friends who also lost their dad in 9/11, I couldn't say that to them, that I would look at that stuff, right? I felt different. And so I try to be a voice as much as I can for children who lost someone on 9/11, for my own brothers who don't have the courage to speak up about their own stories, their own pain, and for all of us who have something that we're going through. 9/11 to me is an event that changed. It is obviously an event that changed our world and our future and where our world is going. But we learned so much from that. And one of the biggest things we learned from it was resilience. And that's a huge part of my story. I was knocked down countless times. I mean, someone who went through some of the stuff I went through, even, one day at a time, beating addiction, I shouldn't be here. And I believe I'm here for a reason and a purpose. And to me, that's to spread a message of hope and resilience and try to save someone's life. So I took up way too much time. Thank you guys so much. God bless.
Thank you so much, Matt, for sharing part of your story, and I'm looking forward to hearing more in the storytelling panel that will follow our next video. My name is Catherine. I am the COVID-19 Response Program Manager at Tuesday's Children, and it is my pleasure to introduce a short film by one of our 9/11 family members, Sheena Jane. Kaleidoscope carries the observer through post-pandemic New York and shows how, in moments of communal struggle, New York City's myriad of diversity shows its heart and reminds us of our humanity.
I understand what loss feels like. I lost my dad in 9/11, and it devastated me. I will never forget everything I saw and felt, the pain of it all. But while we searched for him at hospitals or went to memorials over the years, I also saw something else that I can never forget. Compassion, community, resilience. It made me feel like even though my grief was my own, that I was not alone. To me, you've got to collect those small moments of humanity so that when you feel yourself in darkness, you've got a light to help guide you forward.
New York State alone now has more coronavirus cases than any single country in the world.
It is somehow unimaginable, unbelievable, that in the most famous city of the richest country in the world, they're digging mass graves for those who can't afford a funeral. So many New York hospitals have had to bring these refrigerated lorries in to act as makeshift morgues.
This, as the city's chief medical examiner will now only hold bodies in the city morgue for 6 days before being sent to Hart Island for temporary burial.
There are so many dead. The military has been mobilized to collect them.
Still, the number of deaths is so staggering. Funeral homes.
New York City remains the national epicenter of the pandemic. It has more than a quarter of those sickened so far. This is overwhelming the city's hospitals.
In New York, the loss we experienced felt unending and superfluous. The first time I went out was 9 days after lockdown. I saw morgue trucks and flyaway toe tags. It was the first time I cried during the pandemic. I knew that in those trucks were people from my community, my fellow New Yorkers. It felt so heavy. It was then that I decided to start taking photographs. It was March of 2020. I felt like I needed to capture this moment in time because I felt like I was living through a poignant piece of history. As I walked everywhere, I wondered if the city could still be the city without all of the people buzzing around in it. After 9/11, I knew that the city persevered, but I never knew what we might face in the future and how we'd react to it. Could we still come together? Then I realized I was finding beauty in the midst of all of this anguish. I didn't just see a city struggling to cope with loss and fear. While the city that never sleeps was dormant and empty, it felt like a sign that our city was united in protecting ourselves and each other. I saw messages of hope, gratitude, people coming together, people taking care of each other. In some ways, I think the sense of community pulled us through dark times. These signs and messages gave us a feeling of belonging and empathy. Because by June 16th, New York City alone had lost over 21,000 people. The entire state of California had lost 5,000.
Cell phone video captured Chauvin with his knee pinned on Floyd's neck for more than 8 minutes as Floyd said he could not breathe and onlookers asked him to get off his neck.
26-year-old emergency medical technician killed in a hail of police gunfire during a botched drug raid at her apartment.
Breonna Taylor should be alive today.
25-year-old Ahmaud Arbery was shot dead in the South Georgia neighborhood of Satilla Shores.
We have two justice systems in America. One for Black America and one for white America.
I'm here for George. No matter what anybody thinks, he was good. And this is the proof that he was a good man.
At that time, people were scared to go out, to be around each other. We were told that we'd lower numbers if we kept on social distancing, but we went out there anyways. While New York City was the global epicenter of the pandemic, people flooded yesterday's empty streets. I thought to myself, how could a virus be more indiscriminate than facets of our society? I think others may have felt that too.
My brother's daughter have to live without me. I'm through crying. I'm ready to fight. I'm ready to stand for my brother. I'm ready to get justice for my brother. That's why I'm here.
And through it all, again, we took care of each other. Part of me marvels at the fact that we came out with such high risk looming over us. I realized that we stayed home to protect each other, and now we were on the streets to protect each other. While it was such a contrast, it reminded me that as big as New York City is, we still feel like a community. People handed out water, sanitizer, masks, food, care kits. Whatever you needed, someone was there to help. Sometimes I wonder if what happened to my dad will have ever been worth it. We lost him because he was a part of this country. Nowadays, the country feels stifled by division and disunity. But in New York, it's always been a little different. For me, it comes down to a quote from Jay-Z. New York has 1,000 universes in it that don't always connect, but we do all walk the same streets, hear the same sirens, ride the same subways, see the same headlines in the Post, read the same writings on the wall. That shared landscape gets inside all of us and, in some small way, unites us, makes us think we know each other even when we don't. The worst moment of my life was here. And yet, I love New York more than ever. Seeing how the city came together these past couple of years felt like redemption. It's always been the New York way. Perhaps it also reminds me of my dad's kindness and thoughtfulness. Memories I will always hold on to. The city will always keep on keeping on. So hold on to those New York moments. Because when you find yourself in the darkest of places, you'll remember that here, you're never alone.
I'm going to ask our panelists for the storytelling to come up if you could. Thank you. So, unlike Harry, my friend Harry, I am not 6'7", so I am going to be sitting down. But I do want to take a minute and just speak to the storytelling panel. If you'll humor me for 1 second. Too many notes, guys, sorry. So I'm Sarah. I've been with Tuesday's Children for a very, very long time, and I came in from Snoqualmie, Washington, because I can't imagine being anywhere other than with you guys today. I'm going to introduce the panel. You guys all had the opportunity to hear from that. And I just kind of want to frame our discussion today with a couple things. We really want to define storytelling as our personal narratives and not stories created equal, but often requiring digging into the hard parts and really not glossing over anything that could be or even evoke some of these pain points. But there are so many benefits to so many people, and I'm sure the storytellers will tell you about what has come to them in this process. But there's so many benefits to the listeners too. And that's you, our audience today. A real part of what drives me in my work at Tuesday's Children is that I get to hold the stories that people bring us every day. So, I'm the crier on the team. There's this great book, if you guys haven't heard about it already. It's called The Healing Power of Storytelling, and it's about using a personal narrative to navigate trauma as well as loss and illness, and it's by Annie Brewster. There's a couple themes that we want to kind of have as our tenets for today's discussion, and we're going to go through those with you. The first being agency, the idea that you're feeling like you're in the driver's seat and you're in control. The second being communion, and by that I mean connection, relationships, and positive mental health. And then there's the idea of coherence, the process itself. I'm not sure I always feel very coherent, but that's why we have each other, right? The idea of redemption, finding positive elements that can turn negative into positive, and accommodative processing and making meaning. So I hope that what we're able to offer you today is an opportunity to hear some of those pillars and be able to reflect on them together. I want to make a special shout out to someone special on the very end of the table. This is our friend Elizabeth. Unfortunately, Joe had to respond to a homicide in Queens. So while we are very sorry for the NYPD today and that family and friends, we're really happy that Elizabeth got to sit with us today. And I think what is really important about each of these panelists is they're going to give you an idea of story doesn't have to be verbal. In Elizabeth's case, it's photographs. In Sheena's case, it's film. So I'm excited to have this discussion with each of you today. Okay, so Matt, we're going to start with you if that's okay.
Sure.
Can you talk to us about what was your moment of acceptance or even freedom that confirmed storytelling was an outlet you wanted to amplify? Take that mic, move it a little bit.
Hello?
Let's give it a shot.
Testing. Well, I started writing when I was a kid. When I was 10 years old, my uncle gave me a journal. He said to write in it every single night. Write whatever you want. Doesn't have to be anything concise, but just get your feelings out there. And so I did that. And when I started writing my book, I sort of went back to that same feeling. So I felt the relief by getting everything that I went through off my chest onto the page. When I speak, it's obviously coming out of me, and it feels much more cathartic in many ways. I knew that the way I was telling my story, I accepted the fact that I was telling my story in this way and that it could be helpful to someone else when people came up to me and said, you inspired me to talk about my own struggles. And that's when I started to say, okay, maybe I have a purpose in this, and it's something I was passionate about, but it was something I actually pursued because of that. I hope that answers that coherently.
Yes. Thank you, Matt. I appreciate it. I'm going to ask Sharonda to answer the next question, but before I do, I want to introduce you to the powerhouse that is Sharonda. She wanted me to make sure to note that on September 11th, she was serving in the Air Force, and I think that's a really important place to start today. Sharonda, if you could tell us a little bit about your work with COVID Survivors for Change, having lost your dear father to COVID, but also if you could tell us a little bit about how advocacy and making positive change has led you to know, like you said to me today, storytelling comes naturally to you.
So to answer that question, I think you have to understand pieces of my story. Number one, not only was I serving in the military on 9/11, my father was a veteran. So I'm a military kid. I grew up on military bases. And that shaped my entire world. It shaped my entire existence and how I responded to the world. As a kid, and it's funny because I didn't really know all of these pieces about my dad. Like he explained, you're watching all these things when you're a kid and you don't necessarily really know what's happening. My father worked in casualty assistance. I didn't know that as a kid. I learned that actually as I was writing his obituary. My dad lived a life of service. You know, I watched him do that. He was a leader in our church, a leader in our community, a military servant. He left the military and continued serving case managing social services offices across the state of Delaware. So service was kind of embedded in my core because of how I grew up. And then, you know, I served myself. Like I mentioned, I was serving on 9/11. My entire world shifted. I joined the military not thinking I would ever be involved in conflict. I joined during a peaceful time. And then 9/11 happened and everything shifted. And of course, anyone who served during 9/11, all of us wanted to protect this country. So you're excited about, it's a crazy thing. You're not really excited about war, but you're excited about protecting your country. I wanted to do that. I wanted to serve. My unit didn't get called up when everyone else was getting called up to go to Afghanistan. That's when we wanted to go, right? I ended up going to Iraq at the start of that war. That was not what I wanted. That's not what I thought I signed up for. And those experiences shaped who I became as a person. So when I left the military, I knew I wanted to do something different. I knew I wanted to serve. I knew I wanted to help people. And I ended up working for our now president, managing offices taking care of veterans. And I would get calls from veterans telling me their horrors and their trauma and their stories, and I'm trying to help them. So I'd share them with them pieces of my story. I wasn't storytelling because I wanted to heal. I was storytelling because I wanted to help other people, which is kind of a crazy thing, right? But I learned because of that, that my story, sharing my story, processing my story actually could help me heal. And I underwent lots of therapy myself to process my own pain. And I sing. We talked about different modes of sharing your story. To sing, you have to be able to tell a story. So it's a strange thing. This is while I was still dealing with all of my craziness from Iraq. I started sharing I found songs that fit my story, and I started putting images of my picture, my story to song, and it helped me heal. So when my dad passed, I was more broken than I was before. I remember thinking, my God, how do you come back together? Like, how many times do you have to be broken? And I didn't know what to do. The most natural thing for me was storytelling. That's how I began sharing my story about my loss with my dad. I didn't realize at the time that it really was a cathartic thing for me. Every time I shared my story, I had to process what I experienced. I had to process my pain, and it really was helping me heal in the process. I think I answered the first question. And the second one, do I see mental health benefits? Absolutely. Because when you share your story, there's a couple of things that occur. Number one, you have to process that story. Number two, you have to look at it kind of objectively, not just like the person that it happened to, but to the people that are receiving your story, to your audience. And when you start to look up at your story objectively, you see different things that you wouldn't have seen before. So it's a very healthy thing to see a different perspective in terms of healing. But there's one more thing that occurs, and that is when you're able to vulnerably share the most traumatic experiences that you've had, and you can share them from a place of, they broke me, but I'm still standing. It creates a moment where you go from victim to victor. So yes, absolutely health benefits, yes.
Say that again, Sharonda. You go from victim.
You go from victim to victor because you're sharing the worst part of your life with other people. And you're sharing it saying, I went through this hell, but it didn't break me. Now I'm not a victim. I've conquered what tried to conquer me. So it becomes a healing thing.
Thank you, Sharonda. I'm going to turn it over to Chena. We had the opportunity to see the brilliance that is Chena's filmmaking earlier. Chena, if you could tell us a little bit about your story, I'd appreciate it. And if you could kind of also talk to us about what storytelling looks like for you, but also why do you think you chose modality?
You know, for me, losing my dad was, I mean, it was something I was scared of happening when I was a kid. He would sit by my bed and talk to me about it. It was a thing. It was like my worst fear in the world. And then it happened. And I was in my first year of college. It was like my first 4 days of college when that happened. And I was going to art school, so naturally art therapy kind of became a thing, I suppose, in some of my projects. And, you know, for my senior project, I even did a small book as well, like a 100-page book that I self-published. That was like very designy and, you know, had a lot of stories. And yeah, I think just in my background, I'm a creative director in advertising. And so, and I've always been really passionate about photojournalism. So actually, I first started this project as a photojournalism project. I live right by Brooklyn Hospital. And I actually saw articles online about like some Brooklyn hospital lifting up, you know, bodies with a forklift. And I was like, oh, I wonder where that is. And then I watched the video and I was like, oh my God, that's around the corner from me. And so I started walking around and taking photos. And at first it was really jarring. But the more I took photos of my community, and I walked everywhere, like I walked over the Manhattan Bridge to, you know, Manhattan, I was taking those Revel mopeds wherever I could. I just started seeing a lot of heart. And to me, what I thought was really important about that, not only was it a historical perspective that I thought needed to be captured in some way, it did very much remind me of what I felt after 9/11 when I lost my dad, and there were people around the country, you know, sending letters and drawings and things. And in fact, at the crisis center, one of them, I saw a kid's name in his school, and I actually wrote to the school to thank them for doing this. And his parents like sent me a $50 check from Montana, which I never cashed. But, and you know, at the same moment, I recognized that like where we are today as a country, don't know if our ideologies would match. I don't. But I do think that there's something to be said about the positivity of us being human beings and not caring about all that other stuff that is noise and just being there for other people. So as I started taking all these photographs, I actually ended up designing and like writing essays for a 200-page book. I tried to shop it around a little bit. Publisher was like, no one wants to hear about COVID. Great. So I applied for a documentary intensive program, which I got into. And based on that, actually, I originally wanted the documentary to just be like an observation. I didn't want it to be my voice. I didn't want it to be my story. I was really hesitant for any of that to be out there. And as I talked to some people, you know, that I was working with, my peers, they were like, well, why do you want to tell this story? And I was like, well, you know, it reminds me of what I felt back then. I mean, don't get me wrong, there were also some really negative things I was feeling back then. And there were a lot of negative things about COVID and the protests and all of that. But, you know, as I've gotten older and I've dealt with massive amounts of therapy and depression and sadness and grief, I also recognize that you have to take, if you overlook some of these small positive things that are out there in the world, you get so fixated on the negative things that this idea of healing becomes very limiting in a way, because you can't collect all these small things and make something bigger for yourself if you don't look at them and observe them and take them in. And I just felt that it was really important. Granted, I didn't know where people were going to see this film. Granted, it's actually gotten out there a little bit internationally, which is great. But you know, New York was very different from other places. And I went to a lot of different places after COVID, and I heard about some of the stories, and no one ever imagined what it was like for us here. And I just felt like it was incredibly positive to know that, you know, yeah, okay, we were really suffering and we had a lot of loss. But the signs that I saw in my community, the positivity, the encouragement that we're there for each other, but then also even, you know, doesn't matter what you believe politically about protests and whatnot. The simple fact is those could have been super spreader events. They could have, but everyone was there giving out masks, care kits, and they were taking care of each other. And for that many people to be coming together, I went to over 40 protests. It did not become that because we as New Yorkers took care of each other. And I feel like that is something that is very much a narrative of our history as New Yorkers because of the density of our population, the layers of culture, and just who we are. We're sort of forced to be around each other for good or bad, and you might see the most bizarre thing, you're like, you know, whereas like, you know, a visitor from out of town, like, hey, someone's gonna pass by you, they're gonna get in your face, I need you to look at me. Don't look anywhere else, just look at me, then they're gonna pass you by. So that's kind of why I wanted to tell that story, and it just ended up being something that went from book format to film format, and I can tell you that I took over 20,000 photographs. So that's a smattering of them.
Thank you, Tina. We appreciate it. And if you guys haven't heard about her mom's work, I'm hoping we get a chance to talk about that towards the end. Another way of turning pain into purpose. We would love to share that with you. So we're going to turn to Megan, who lost her brother-in-law on 9/11. Right after the tragedy, she lived with her sister for 6 weeks and very much witnessed the kindness of those around her and her family. But it very much changed the trajectory about how she was looking at the world. So using her private practice experience, she started HeartWorks, and 18 years later, it is still an incredible nonprofit making tremendous positive change in this community. She's also the author of Angels Over the Tower. And I'm hoping Megan can tell us more about how storytelling has shifted your identity.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me. How storytelling has shaped my identity. So what I would say first off is that with storytelling, my story was different 22 years ago than it is now. And one of the things that I'm actually just really formulating today, listening to all of you, is that the story is going to keep changing. So when 9/11 first happened, I'm involved in a very Irish Catholic enmeshed family. My sister Marianne had been with my brother-in-law since high school. They were high school sweethearts. They started dating when I was about 8. So John was, you know, a brother to me. And when 9/11 happened, it was this I always talk about the bizarreness of having your own personal loss, like life as we knew it was over. My sister is 41. She's got these 4 young kids. And that in and of itself was just, you know, that feeling of when you wake up and it's like life will never be the same. And then to be a 9/11 family and have the outside world match our inside world. Because I remember one night we sat down to distract the kids and the Yankees, we thought we were going to watch the Yankees game, and then the Yankees game got canceled. And my little niece looked and said, "Is that because of what happened to Daddy?" And I said, "Yes, sweetheart." So my nieces and nephews were given this opportunity of when their life stopped, so did the world. And most people in their own private losses don't have that experience. And so for me, this organization, HeartWorks, we help people during their first 14 months of grief and illness. All of it is replicating what people did for my sister's family, from picking my nieces and nephews up to go to soccer practice to, you know, one of the stories that sticks out in my mind is a neighbor was dropping off 2 coffees every morning. And then he must have gotten word that I drank Diet Coke and not coffee. So then a Diet Coke and a coffee, you know, arrived every morning. And it was these minuscule little acts of kindness that saved us. And for me to see my father crying, my mother crying, my sister crying, the kids crying, it was like there was nowhere you went. And then I would take the kids to the grocery store. Matthew knows my nieces and nephews. I would take them to the grocery store, and everybody at the grocery store is crying, right? And so for me, the storytelling became something that even today, when you say 9/11, everybody is invested because everybody has a sense of that day. And most people don't have that. don't have that investment of everybody understanding what you're talking about. And so for me, it was sort of like God, the universe, the invisible worked through me in a way that was like, this story has to be told because this will not be forgotten. And I had this perspective of seeing that my nieces and nephews were not understanding the crashing planes and the burning buildings, but they were understanding the teddy bears being made of their dad's t-shirts. They were understanding, you know, the ice cream truck pulling up in front of the house. And so the story of, you know, it's very, you know what my favorite thing about today is? That so many people are talking about the fact that we're in therapy. Because it is, I am like, thank you, God, that the helpers are getting help. And recently I started up therapy again, and I went in and I told my story, and I said, for 18 years, I've been doing this organization, and we get 100 women at a meeting every month, and we're doing this and we're doing that. And it's really, for many years, it was an obsession. And I never, you know, I would get up at 6:30 in the morning and I would go, and there's people with cancer and there's people dying in car accidents, and I have to do for them what the country did for my sister. We weren't living in a country where her husband gets killed and then we have to hide out in a cave. So there was a lot of guilt for me about what was coming towards my sister when I knew it wasn't happening in other areas of the world. And I lost my train of thought.
That's okay. You're segueing so well into Elizabeth. You can put a pin right there.
Okay.
Thank you, Megan. I
Yeah.
appreciate it very much. I said before that I get to hear people's stories at Tuesday's Children, and I think it makes me very human. I'm hoping Elizabeth can tell us. First, I'm hoping you can share that story. I'm sorry, Elizabeth, I love you. About when the neighborhood came and they said to you, what do you need? And you were like, actually, I need to go for a walk. What happened?
What was that first word that you used? The A word in your, about having control?
Oh, agency.
Agency. So I had no agency today because Sarah at lunchtime said, hey, Joe can't make it. Can you fill in? And before I realized what, tell me your name, I'm sorry. Your name. No, you.
Ryan?
No, Dea. What Dea said about learning how to say no, I was sitting here going, I could have learned that from her had I seen her a little bit earlier.
But she did say, I won't say no.
I'll do anything for you, Sarah. So my name's Elizabeth. I lost my husband on 9/11. I do have something in common with Joe because he's a 9/11 responder family member. My husband was a civilian first responder. He was outside of the buildings when the planes hit, and he went back in to help evacuate. He worked for the Port Authority in building management and left behind 5 kids, 2 my stepchildren. One was your age and one was 13. And I had a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 1-year-old. So I cried through all of yours too. The story that Sarah's referring to is after 9/11, people asked, you know, what can we do? What can we do? And I couldn't breathe, so I didn't know. So I said to my friend, I want to hire some. At that time, I was working in the city, and I was walking 3 mornings a week at 5 o'clock in the morning with 2 of my girlfriends. And I said, I want to keep walking. Find me somebody I can hire to come to my house at 5 o'clock in the morning. And she came back to me not very long after and said, I can't find anybody for you to hire, but I found 3 people to volunteer. 1 on Monday, 1 on Wednesday, and 1 on Friday morning to come to my house at 5 o'clock in the morning so that you can walk. And the first morning, this woman who I had never met came into my house at 5 o'clock in the morning, and she said, I lost my dad when I was 18 months old. And we had a good cry. And And she's a dear friend today. And the three of them all, they listened to my story because not only were they willing to sit and be so that I could have a little bit of me time. What did we call it? Self-care. But they were good listeners to my story, and something that I've learned in therapy is you have to give it voice. And I think that's what the storytelling is all about, giving your pain voice.
Don't move that mic.
We're the crying side of the table.
So I'm going to change it up because Joe's question would have been different. But one of the things Rob said earlier was about an emotional toolbox. And I'm wondering, what did you have in your emotional toolbox that you added after losing Bob that you're putting back into the world as you photograph people's milestones and moments?
I think the biggest thing that I had in my emotional toolbox is the ability to give it voice. I wasn't shy about giving it voice and telling the story. I think I'm really good at surrounding myself with people who will listen to the story, because I did read your question to Joe, which is, what is a barrier? See, I was preparing myself, but thanks for changing the question. And the barrier, I think, to telling your story is that sometimes it's hard because you need to have people who are open to giving you space to tell the story. And I'm blessed with people. And I don't know if that's my ability to choose or God's ability to put the right people in my path, but and I also had a very big village, and my emotional toolbox is really filled with not my own tools, but with lots of tools brought by a very big village, including, and not limited to all of you at Tuesday's Children, who've listened to my story many times.
Never enough. Thank you, friend. Sharonda, could you build on that for us a little bit? Because I think that's, when you said your favorite part of the day, I wasn't sure what you were going to say, because I have about 47, but the theme around giving people the space. What can we do as people that have the honor and privilege of bearing witness to a storyteller? How can we be the conduit we need to be?
So, you know, it's funny. This was a really tough thing for me to really think about and kind of figure out, because I mentioned to you storytelling. It just comes naturally for me, I think. And I realize it's not that way for many people. But I think what helped me most in the beginning after my dad passed, and I didn't really realize it, when you lose a loved one from COVID, the way I lost my dad, like I didn't get to be with him, I didn't get to really see him, I didn't get to say all the things that you want to say to your loved one before they passed, and it was very abrupt. You need, you know, you guys talked about people that'll bring you coffee, people that'll help you. And that's one of the things I think that was probably missing for lots of people who lost loved ones to COVID. I lost my entire community when my dad died, because my dad caught COVID leading worship in church. And everyone was saying to me, don't talk about it. Don't say anything about it. Nobody was giving me permission to really be broken. My brokenness was wrong. You know, when I would go in the world and wear my mask, I remember I went into a mechanic shop and he had a sign up that said, don't wear your mask. You're not saving anyone here. Yeah. And I had something called rage. You know, people talk about the stages of grief. One of them should be rage. It was beyond rage. And I said, oh, no, this guy's going to hear I told him the story from start to finish. Well, maybe if they had worn their mask, my dad would be here today. But here's the thing that I needed. I needed a safe space to share my story. And I didn't understand that. Our executive director for COVID Survivors for Change, Chris, is actually here today. And he created that space for me. We have something that we call COVID Connections, where we have trauma-informed therapists who actually sit with people who've lost their loved ones to COVID. I didn't understand it. I was going to different spaces like that, other spaces virtually, where people were sharing their stories. And honestly, I was just coming in to listen, not thinking I needed any help, even though I knew I was broken. And them sharing their stories gave me permission to share mine. So I think I'd say find the spaces that are safe for you to share those stories. Find the people that will really listen to you and help you really understand what is your story. But the other thing that I've realized has kind of shaped all of my storytelling, and I wouldn't have, if you'd asked me this question in the beginning, I wouldn't have said this. What shaped it is really thinking about what do I want to accomplish by sharing my story. And I didn't realize it in the beginning. I had goals for sharing my story. I shared my story because I didn't want other people to go through the kind of pain that I was going through. I shared my story because I started to realize that when I was holding hands with other people who were dealing with the same kind of pain, it was helping me heal. So I knew that we needed more spaces like that so that other people could heal. So I had a goal that there was going to be a permanent COVID memorial in the state of Delaware, which there is today, that I helped plant. I had a goal because I realized I was the only one in my family who wasn't working at the time when my dad died, and my entire family, I'm a fully disabled veteran, not working, but I was running a crisis operations center from my house. So I had this goal that Americans should all have extended paid time off when these things happen. And it failed at the federal level, but guess what? In the state of Delaware, we have that today because I yelled and screamed like a crazy person. So I would say think about, number one, what do you want to accomplish in sharing your story? And then make sure when you use your voice to share that story, your story fits your goal. But then also think about your audience, because I had an audience who didn't want to hear anything I had to say. They still don't today, and I'm yelling it from the rooftops. Think about your audience and how you can help them understand your world. Because people only have empathy when they understand your experience, which is why you have to tell your story. And the last thing I will say is understand if you don't tell your story, somebody else is. And it might not be the truth. Like, people were yelling, COVID's not real, people aren't dying from COVID, all of these different things that people were saying, and my story was different. And if I did not use my voice to tell my story about my family and my dad, somebody else was going to. So when you remember that, you'll share your story.
Thank you, Shonda. We want to hear your story.
Thank you.
Matt, I'm going to pivot on you a little bit. So one of the things Shonda just said is you have to think about what you want to accomplish when telling your story. And one of the things Dea said earlier was that PCB was forcing her to have conversations that she hadn't had before. And I know on your journey and your storytelling and your experience as an author, keynote speaker, many things yet to come. The book is called Swag, if you haven't already read it. Talk to us a little bit about how you kind of broke through when you were talking about things that were very uncomfortable and how you felt like you had to keep charging through.
Okay, so first off, I'm going to backtrack to the first part of the question with, like, you said, like, the motive or the goal.
What do you want to accomplish?
So, like I said, when I tell my story, I feel like it's multifaceted in many ways, but one thing I'll say is this. I feel like from a child of 9/11's perspective, trying to express to people what Megan was talking about, what we felt, right? I wear this bracelet. I'm sure you've probably seen these bracelets before. It says my dad's name on it and the World Trade Center. I've gone through 10 of them in the last 22 years because when I was a little kid, I would bend it so much it would fit my wrist. And I got bullied for wearing it when I was in high school. And so you can't really expect kids to act, normally when it comes to things like this. But when you're one of the only kids in your area that lost a dad on 9/11, to lose a parent anyway is horrible as a child. To lose it in a way that's so sensationalized where the whole entire world can witness your loved one's last moments, there's no privacy. So for me, what I struggled with the most was not only thinking about my dad in that building, what he must have been feeling. Megan said, like, my mom and her sister were in the same support group, and a lot of the other women in there, I'm friends with their kids. I think like 90% of the dads that passed away in that group worked at Cannon Fitzgerald. So to me, I thought to myself, what were all these guys like thinking or saying to one another in this building? You hear individual stories from each person, like they're calling their loved one saying goodbye. Like, did they all just say, like, we have to say goodbye? Like, it's just one of those things that's so baffling that I can't even fathom what they were going through. So when I'm as a child working through that own emotional aspect of it, and it took years to get to that point, kids today don't understand. They weren't alive during 9/11. And some adults don't understand if they didn't lose anyone related to them or know of a kid who, his parent passed away. They don't really understand either. So I try to express what I went through so that people can understand that it didn't take a year. It didn't take a month. It didn't take burying my dad to be able to cope and process it and grieve and move on. When you're getting calls 5-6 years later that they're finding remains, how can you, it regurgitates everything that you felt. So part of my story is trying to let people understand what I went through, how it took a long time to get to the point I'm at today. And what Megan and I were talking about before I got up and spoke was I need to take care of myself. Sobriety-wise, that's one aspect of it, but it's draining talking about this stuff sometimes, people expect, I feel like sometimes people expect a lot out of me to be very vulnerable, which I feel better about doing, and I heal each time I tell my story, but I'd be lying if I said it's not draining at times. So that's one part of what I'm trying to accomplish. And then the other aspect of what I want to accomplish with telling my story and the way I do is it's okay to be suffering. It's okay to be struggling. It's okay to go through pain. I think it takes a courageous person to talk about that pain and to be upfront about it. When I talk about being abused, I want kids to know that it's okay. If you went through that, if you're going through something like that, if you've been assaulted in any way, you're a victim. You're not really a victim, you're a survivor. That's what I say about myself. We think when you're a victim in that situation, you don't want to talk about it because you're manipulated and you feel like you can't be honest. And so I try to break the barrier and be raw, honest, and vulnerable so that people can feel inspired to do the same. Second part of the question. I get very amped up when I start doing this.
No, it's okay. One of the things we were talking about when we reconnected maybe 2 weeks ago was the idea that you were discussing things that were hard and painful. And there was a lot of people that weren't ready to hear some of what you were willing to share. And you talk a lot about courage. And I'm wondering, could you share a little bit more as to one, what drives you to push through that resistance? And two, to go back to the original question, how do you know that, continues to be the message you want to accomplish?
Okay, so first part of that is with the day of 9/11 being so photographed, filmed, in the days that followed, a lot of it was very censored, in my opinion. One thing that was shared before was how there was so much unity, and those are the images that, I understand why, were so widely spread. People coming out of the building together, helping one another. There was no racial divide, there was no discrimination, there was no nothing. It was just love and humanity was shown in the purest form. I just lost my train of thought.
Okay. Difficult conversations.
Okay, so people in my family especially, and this is something that other 9/11 families reached out to me, children, saying they had the same difficult conversations. A child growing up witnessing all the things that are at their hands. There were so many documentaries that came out about 9/11 that were very graphic, very detailed. You start to just think about things, and you start saying things, and parents, my mom did not want to hear it, truthfully, you know, and I don't blame her. She was trying to move on with her life, and for me to ask her the questions I was asking her, I thank God she didn't give up on me years prior to that, because I was relentless. But having those difficult conversations did eventually help me. I keep losing my train of thought. So
That's okay. No, it's okay. Yes, please, go ahead.
yeah, go.
So one of the things that Matthew and I were talking about before we got up here, this idea of storytelling, I feel very protective of the storyteller because there are stories, there are public stories. I remember bringing my niece to the grocery store, and on the front of every magazine was the buildings falling. And for her, her story was just that her dad wasn't coming home. It wasn't this national event. She didn't even have an understanding of it being a national event. And so when you are telling stories, especially with traumatic stories, the people that you're talking to, you don't know what their traumas are, and you don't know what it's bringing up for them. And then also, you know, I just kept saying to Matthew, I haven't seen him for a long time, but take it slow and take care of yourself. Because I know for me, for a long time with my foundation, I felt a responsibility because I had learned so much and I had taken in so much that I felt a huge responsibility to teach and to educate and to say thank you to first responders and say thank you to the world for what they had given my family. And it wears on you. So back to that idea of so many people today talking about being in therapy. When I got back into therapy a couple of months ago and I told her the story, this is where I lost my train of thought. She said to me, Megan, for 18 years, you've been trying to stop bad things from happening and you've been trying to stop death. And I was like, oh shit, you're right. And so when you get into the vibe and you become known as a storyteller, you have to take care of yourself so that you're not lost in the story. And like my point to Matthew is only share what you feel ready to share in any particular situation. And if you walk into a room, this is an extremely safe room. I mean, this has been a room all day of just hugs and I feel like I know everybody, but not every audience is like this. So that own your story enough that you are protecting yourself and sharing only what feels reasonable in that moment when you're sharing your story. I jumped in, but that just felt important.
That was good. I'm glad you did.
No, thank you, Megan. That's really helpful. I heard a couple things. Well, I heard 1,012 things, but 2 things to highlight. And the idea of agency, feeling like you're in the driver's seat and in control, but also the idea of being accommodative and making meaning. Would you mind passing it back down to the very end? There is someone at Tuesday's Children who has a real gift for level setting when we're feeling quite emotionally charged. And she said to us once, I need Tuesday's Children because Tuesday's Children is my safe place to land. So, Elizabeth, I'm wondering for you, what does a safe space to land look like? And how do you make sure that those around you have it?
Tuesday's Children is a very safe space to land. I'm going to try not to bang into the microphone like I did before. What does a safe space to land look like? It looks like acceptance, and it looks like listening and non-judgmental. And I think as parents, and especially single, you said, how do I give that safe space to? I think that over the years of being a single parent, some days you do it well, and some days you don't do it well, and to me, to tie in also the word resilience is not that you never fall, but that you get back up again. And I like to think that over the years, I try to give my kids and I think it's our responsibility. We talk about us telling our stories to be healing for ourselves, but I think that when you've been affected by a tragedy like this, we should in turn be good listeners to other people for their stories, because we know what it's like to need a safe space where we can talk. I can't tell you how many times I'm sure I told the same story over and over and over and over again. And for somebody to just sit and look at me as if I was telling it for the first time and they were hearing it for the first time. And that's a gift. And I think we all have a responsibility to give that gift back to people. And I try to do that. I don't know that I succeed all the time, but it's certainly what I try to do.
She came to my house in Snoqualmie with a gift for both of my children. She's changing the world for sure. I'm wondering, can we build on that, Sheena? And can you talk to us more about the idea of communion, connection, relationships? I know I just changed on you a little bit. And then if you could add your thoughts around how culture bleeds into storytelling.
Sure. That first part, repeat that again.
Sure, I apologize. Trying to make some weaves from one note to another, and the idea of communion, connection, and relationships.
Yeah, I mean, again, I started college when 9/11 happened, and, you know, it became very much like, I went to school in Rochester. I mean, it's Rochester. I'm actually going there tomorrow. I love it up there, but at the time, it's like a snowy tundra, and you're like, But it's all the people that I met there that made that experience worthwhile and that were encouraging and positive towards me, that allowed me to excel in college despite the challenges I faced. But I will also say there were a lot of challenges too, because as someone who is an Indian woman, having lost my father in a terrorist attack, the number of times I was called a suicide bomber, a terrorist, or drop bombs on India, Pakistan, and Afghanistan, let God sort them out. To know that I lost my father, and for someone to play a song that he danced to at a wedding and say it's Bin Laden's rap, that sucks. Because he was born in India, but he died as an American citizen. And people forget that sometimes. So I do think that with storytelling, there are two facets of how culture come into play, right? It's your perception and your understanding and your observation. And then there's also the idea of how people perceive you. And it would be hard for me to say anything other than, you know, yeah, I don't know that I talk about the racist aspect of it very often. I can tell you I've been called a suicide bomber at a McDonald's, and I've been called a terrorist at the Mandarin Oriental. Doesn't matter what spectrum of economics you're on. It still comes out. But so yeah, there's the perception of you by others, and then there's your perception, and then sometimes those things are intertwined. It's also strange to know that from a cultural perspective, like, you know, in India, like when you lose your husband in the past, like people, like the women would like throw themselves on the funeral pyre. Like the way my mom is now, like she cannot fathom having a new life without my dad. It can't happen. And so for me, like I've become the surrogate for my dad. And for me, I just think oftentimes I look at her and 9/11 is hard because I remember that I lost my father. It's a reminder of the trauma that we went through looking for him and all of those facets. But it also reminds me that I have a mom that has a lot of medical issues, is frail, and has no one to take care of her, and will never have anyone to take care of her because of the way our culture is. And so sometimes that is a painful part of storytelling that not everyone's going to understand. And you can share that with people, and that's fine. I think there are a lot of different facets of how that story comes to life, the racist aspect, the cultural aspect, and you have the grief of losing someone, but then how do you layer on those cultural aspects, those racist aspects? It adds exponentially to the form of trauma you feel, and that's hard.
Yeah, Sharonda has some points to make. Sharonda, do you just mind giving Tina the mic for 30 seconds? Because I really would love to just give voice to how Tina's mom is building legacy. If you don't mind, Sharonda, just for 30 seconds, that would be really important, I think.
Oh, yeah, no, so, the year it happened, my mom decided to create a memorial trust in my dad's name, and she funds it herself. And we go to India and we help people there. So the first year we did 63 cataract eye surgeries for people in India, plus medical care for eye operations in Delhi. We've done kidney operations, heart checkups. Recently we did prosthetic camps. Like we had small kids coming in that needed new limbs. And the amazing thing is, my mom pays for it, but our family in India are the ones that coordinate it through the Lions Club. And, it just happens to be that the dollar goes farther over there so we can help more people. But one of the things that changed my life and also speaks to resilience is December, we went there in Christmas after 9/11. And we had done the cataract eye surgeries there. And these women were, these women and men were recovering, and we had, had them sleeping, and they got up and just these are all poor people. They kept trying to give my mom money. And I was like, no, I can't take this. And they're like, we have to give you something. And my mom said to them, please just bless my daughters with a long life. And they got up out of their beds and they touched our heads. And for me, now when I look at I try and figure out okay, what's the worth of having this pain? And I keep trying to figure out ways that I can help other people, because after having that moment, I was like a bratty little kid, and I see these women getting up and touching our heads and thanking us for this. It just is so powerful to know that you can be there for other people. And I think sometimes coping with grief is not necessarily a codependent helping of other people, but knowing that you can do something bigger than yourself, and knowing that a legacy of someone you lost and the trauma that you felt can be something exponentially positive for other people. And that's a butterfly effect, because one person that got their eyesight back, that's all the people in their life that are being affected, and I think that that's something that's, this pay it forward idea that I think is really important in our world.
Beautiful. And your niece and nephew are now going with you?
My niece went in December. She helped feed the homeless, or feed the people that needed food. So she's giving out puris and stuff. She's 9. Yeah. And, my sister's with her, and it's awesome to see a 9-year-old handing out food and doing something like that. And she never met her grandfather. Right. I know that they told her about what happened, and she cried horribly when she was 8. And now she's doing something, that is in memory of him. And I think that's just huge.
Thank you. Sharonda, apologies. Thank you for your patience. Wisdom is coming our way.
I just wanted to talk about the cultural piece of that you kind of hit on, that I don't think I've never talked about this publicly. I've thought about it a lot. We all know the media shapes the way the public, the way Americans view things, what they show on the news, what they publish in stories. And I remember when my dad passed, when COVID hit in the beginning, there was lots of media coverage. They wanted to talk to families who were losing their loved ones to COVID. And I remember the first interview I did, and all of the questions they were asking me, they were framing them about my father as an African-American man. And I don't think I really understood what was happening at first. It took me a little bit to actually read the article. My dad grew up in the inner city in DC. My dad chose to enlist during Vietnam when people were dodging the draft. My dad served his country honorably, but you wanted to paint him as an African American man, not as an American who loved this country, you know, signed up to give his life for this country, who caught COVID and died. I can't tell you how many times I talked to reporters and they wanted me to tell my story about my dad as an African American man. It became frustrating for me. I think there was one story that was written, and it was because of Chris, that my story was told a little bit differently because they were talking about COVID Survivors for Change and the work that we were doing, and it wasn't painted African American male. And they wanted me to talk about the health disparity. My dad had the best health care in the world. He was retired military. He had TRICARE for life. He was a civil servant. We didn't pay a dime for anything, but nobody wanted to talk about that. It creates trauma, crazy trauma for people that are already going through trauma to deal with these things that exist in America that nobody really wants to talk about. So there's a huge cultural component that plays into even, like, you can try to tell your story, but if nobody wants to hear it, nobody will print it, nobody will listen, how does your story get told?
So Sharonda, you mentioned the mechanic and you mentioned this reporter, that kind of thing. How do you pivot? How do you remain poised? I'm sure you're very poised. You're a vocalist, right? When there's an agenda in front of you.
You know, I didn't conclude this in the beginning because I had lots of rage and a lot of trauma that I had to process. But I think one day it clicked in my brain. It might have been after we marched across the Brooklyn Bridge. What clicked in my head was there's a heck of a lot of things stacked against us. The deck is stacked against us, you know. But I realized that I could use my energy focusing on those barriers, those hurdles, or I could focus my energy on doing the things to accomplish the things that I knew needed to happen to affect change. So I think mentally, and I'm sure some of this comes from my military training, because in the military you're taught mission first, mission first, mission first, mission first. I started to think less in terms of who won't listen to me or who won't support me or who won't tell this story, and more about who are the people that I'm impacting, what can I change, and I focused my energy on that. I remember saying that actually to some other leaders in the COVID community who were very frustrated. I remember saying, we can't focus on that. We have to focus on the mission and the lives that we will impact by sharing our stories, and just do the work.
I'm wondering, does anyone else on the dais want to comment on the idea of how culture bleeds through in storytelling? You had talked about your Irish family, and Matt had talked about his Italian family. Anything else to offer in terms of how it's bled into your narrative? You don't have to. Okay. Anything else? No. Okay. Sounds good. So I just got the hook, but I guess if it's okay with you guys, we can just end with the question from Elizabeth down to Megan in terms of how does storytelling lend itself to positive change for you and for others? I know it's a big question for a couple seconds, but.
That is a big question.
Sorry.
I think that the more you tell your story, more open people are to hearing it. Hearing what you just said, it rips my heart open to hear that for you. And I think that it's important to hear those things because sometimes we're so stuck in our own story that we never heard that about yours. And thank you, Elizabeth.
God, what was the question again? No, what was the question?
I felt that way before when you spoke. How does storytelling lend itself to positive change making for you and for others?
So I think, first off, again, art therapy is real. So I think telling your own stories is very cathartic. But, I also noticed after 9/11 happened, I started reading a lot of social conflict stories, about Rwanda, the Rwandan genocide, the Sudanese Lost Boys, the Armenian genocide. I was reading about a lot of these things, some of them fiction, some of them nonfiction. And it was just this idea of wanting to relate to others who had felt this pain. And I think that when you have those moments where you share a story, again, it's this idea that you can't escape pain as a human being. I think it's quintessential. But to know that there are others like you or people that have experienced grief at whatever level it is, it's not a competition, that you're not alone. And again, I just think that that's a really powerful thing to know that okay, someone's suffering. Well, listen, I'm here for you. I've been through it. I can empathize with you. And I think building empathy through storytelling is a really big thing. And that's how people relate. So I think that is a huge factor.
Pain is connected to love, right, Monica?
So I would say storytelling forces you to process things on a deeper level. It forces you to see things more objectively. From multiple angles, multiple perspectives. So number one, it helps you heal. But storytelling, it's a strange thing. I don't know, I'm trying to figure out how do I capture what I want to say. There's laws in nature, right? Gravity, what goes up must come down. We all know that, right? How do we know that? It's just a law, right? If I was to say this, I believe this is a law. When you share your story, I talked about going from victim to victor, right? You share the most vulnerable moment of your life that should have crushed you, and now I'm no longer a victim. I conquered that thing and I'm still standing, right? It does that for you. But here's the thing, when you share your story with others, not only does it take you from victim to victor, it opens a door for them to process their experiences in a different way. And it gives them that opportunity to move with you on that journey from victim to victor. So it helps you, but it also helps others. So the law is, when you share your story, it helps you heal, but it also helps others conquer what should have killed them.
That was very good, and I'm going to be reiterating a lot of what the three of you said so far. I'm sitting here just taking it all in. I am going to reiterate a lot. I think that for me, storytelling allows, in my experience, to heal. What I think I can inspire other people to do by telling my story, or just storytelling in general, is to encourage them to share about their own problems, their own struggles, and therefore starting their healing process, their healing journey. I'm going to wrap it up at that. Keep it short and sweet.
Yep, short. I think that vulnerability breeds vulnerability. And when one person shares their story, it connects to the humanity in the room. I was at the convention center after Hurricane Katrina, and for 4 days, I walked around to cots and heard the stories. And then two people that never knew each other would hear, oh, I'm struggling with that too. And then that cot would join in. And soon enough, cots were being scooted over to tell me the stories. And so there is a connection and a vulnerability involved in storytelling that can save lives. And I don't think that that's being dramatic.
Not at all.
I think that it, to your point, it opens the door for other people to share their story, and then there is a connection, because we're all living the same human story. There's different tragedies, different types of tragedy, but it's all the same story of humanity. And so with everybody's story, you're telling the story of humanity, and there's a connection in that and a healing, for sure. Important.
Very important. So what you're saying is there is healing in community. Special plug for TuesdaysChildrenHeal.org if you'd like to watch our long-term healing model. Thank you to our panelists. Special thanks to Elizabeth for jumping in last minute. I think it really speaks to the culture here at Tuesdays Children. We pivot because they've taught us how to pivot. And it's really an honor and a privilege to be with you guys today. I think I just want to end on a couple points, and one is words matter. I think Sharonda was using words that I can't wait to go back and watch this recording to be able to regurgitate later. Considering the fact that we each are listeners, but we also have the power to tell through strength-based language is so essential. Our friend Harry said that vulnerability erases the need to be perfect. So I just want to thank Megan and Matt and Sharonda and Gina and Elizabeth with an S for joining us here today. And I really want to thank you guys as the listeners today, because you've given us the gift of your presence, which is more valuable than presents. And we encourage you to share your story with others. I think my greatest takeaway was the keynote earlier from the UN. He talked about a peaceful future, and that's exactly what you guys are inspiring us to do. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. I was furiously writing down notes for closing statements because there were so many quotable takeaways from everything that everyone said today. So I just want to give another round of applause to this fantastic panel. I just want to say thank you all for coming out for this and for continuing to make this an annual thing. And we also have quarterly events for this. I love these events because these conversations, you know, we start with people who you may think have very different experiences, but organically these varied experiences merge into common themes and connections that really offer hope to each other and to all of us here. We started today with Selena from the Red Cross talking about service, and thank you, Red Cross, for all the tissues for the last two panels. We all needed them. And I think we came full circle today in all our panels and speakers back to service. So some of the takeaways that I'll be processing for a while, I learned from Ryan's profound quote that grief is a motivational state. I think that hit me because it's such a paradox. I've been doing this work for a long time, and I think a lot of people think of trauma and grief as paralyzing states and not necessarily motivational. But the conversations today and what I've witnessed in this work is that pain and struggle are really that part of grief. They're part of love. They're inescapable, as Sheena just added. And we can hold on to those feelings. We can own them. We can harness them, as Harry said. And we can use them as motivators. So I really love that Ryan, you brought that to the conversation. I'd also add that it's apparent from our speakers that resilience is also a motivational state. All of our speakers want to share their stories, their expertise, their experiences to help others, to bring about change and to really own their individual experiences to move from victim to victor. Thank you, Sharonda, for that one. And I just want to thank our whole audience here and online for bearing witness and providing a safe space for all of these lived experiences and for welcoming the connections that were formed today. Thank you to all of our incredible speakers for the spirit of service that you bring and for making all of our emotional toolboxes a bit fuller today. I promise you that your voices are being heard and we will keep listening. And I'm just looking for some of the logistical notes that I had on another thing. Let's see. So we hope this will lead to more productive discussions and ways that we can all collaborate to better support survivors, families, and communities and contribute to recovery and resilience. For those of you who are with us in New York, you can stick around for some networking and mingle with some of our incredible speakers and our staff and our resource partners. And for everyone here and online, we will be sending out an evaluation. And we would like to get feedback from you through that evaluation, but also please, please, please just reach out to us with any thoughts you have. We want to keep these events going. And the house space, as I mentioned, will stay up for 30 days. So hopefully the conversations can continue there. And please, if you can support our mission today, you know, to help us do more events like this, we encourage you to do so. Please visit our websites to learn more about us and follow us online and on socials. And all of us at Tuesday's Children are honored to continue to do this work, which we really wish was not needed. Our families teach us the most about the needs of individuals impacted by trauma and loss. So we will continue to keep the promise to these living memorials and these living legacies. Thank you, everybody.